So a little bit of background here. This guy does nothing but moan about abiogenesis, and he's fumed about me a few times on streams, on SFT or Smoky Saint, etc. And I actually joined one of them where he was less than professional. Apoplectic, really. After giving me God of the Gaps fallacies, he challenged me to watch the Lee Cronin-James Tour debate.
I'm not a biologist.
And then we would talk about it. Almost 9 months of us emailing back and forth to schedule, with him chickening out a couple of times and just sending me the same phrases over and over and over again. I finally got him to agree on the condition that it was on John Maddox's channel. For some more context, this supposedly grown man was so triggered by me simply saying, schedule the debate and I'll talk to you then and tell you what I think of the Cronin Tour discussion there in the actual debate, that he actually threatened to harm me and wanted to physically fight me, going as far as to give me the address of his MMA gym in Florida. This is what confidence looks like, isn't it? When you're right about something, you just try to shift it into a physical battle, right? No, this is not the behavior of someone who's confident, who claims to follow a religion of love and peace, or the behavior of an educator. This is the behavior and language of someone backed into a corner and feeling a lot of pressure and lashing out.
Do you know how you tell when somebody knows that they are losing an argument? Well, that's how. Ad hominem.
So, when I got to the debate, finally, I was waiting in the back room of the StreamYard and nothing. Minutes go by and the title card starts rolling. Maddox pops on and lets us give intros, not even opening statements, and then immediately Maddox, who presumably was supposed to be some sort of moderator, starts arguing with me about a different topic, and then plays a different James Tour video, and he does argue with me about the actual topic too. Then they go to the actual video we came to talk about, but they skipped several minutes of it, and I said that I wanted to go back and address some things said in the time that they skipped. I mentioned this, and Maddox said that there were only a couple of minutes left in the portion he wanted to play, so I said, okay, let's finish that portion and then go back to the beginning where I had some things that I wanted to discuss. Then Tony just left completely out of the blue. And then it ended, obviously. So I feel I have some things to introduce before this farce of a debate begins, a little like the opening statements I had prepared, but was never given the time to present. Tony seems to worship James Tour, and maybe they agree on everything behind the scenes, but everything Tour says publicly actually lines up more with the side of mainstream science than what Tony is pretending it does. Tour is just trying to keep claims that abiogenesis has been solved in check, and good on him. It hasn't been solved. No real scientist would say that it has. Tony seems to think that scientists and atheists claim abiogenesis has been solved, and he seems to think Tour was destroying abiogenesis, while Tour was actually being pretty fair and accurate for the most part. And while he's sympathetic to the arguments of intelligent design and creationism, Tour actually explicitly denies the validity of these arguments. So let's start there. He writes on his personal website, I have been labeled as an intelligent design, sometimes called ID, proponent. I am not. So wow, barely 2 sentences in, and his position on this topic already disagrees with both Tony's position and Tony's interpretation of Tour's position. Tour found it so necessary to differentiate and separate himself from these people that he wrote a whole article about it. Tour continues, I do not know how to use science to prove intelligent design, although some others might. Tour has talked directly with Tony and Smoky Saint, and yet he has not updated this article. It seems he still does not know of any way science can prove intelligent design, even after talking with Tony. Yet Tony believes he has falsified abiogenesis. And he considers Tour to be an authority on disproving abiogenesis. Very curious. Tour says, I am sympathetic to the arguments, and I find some of them intriguing, but I prefer to be free of that intelligent design label. I wonder why. Could it be because they make claims Tour feels cannot be backed up by science? He says, As a modern-day scientist, I do not know how to prove intelligent design using my most sophisticated analytical tools. The canonical tools are, by their own admission, inadequate to answer the intelligent design question. Interesting. So James Tour himself says that science cannot answer this question, in direct contradiction to what Tony and other creationists, lapping at James Tour's scrotum, repeat ad nauseum. Tour continues, I cannot lay the issue at the doorstep of a benevolent creator or even an impersonal intelligent designer. All I can presently say is that my chemical tools do not permit my assessment of intelligent design. So he's explicitly saying it is categorically, scientifically inappropriate to say God must have done it. James Tour reaffirms this in person. In the actual video in question, in the stretch Maddox and Tony decided to skip for reasons, at about 7 minutes 47 seconds.
I have never brought in God into any of my arguments on origin of life. I've never done that. I've sent all the 4 papers that I've written on this topic. I sent them to Lee, and he can attest that I don't mention God in this. I use purely naturalistic explanations for what I have to say about the evidence. I am just merely critiquing the evidence of others. I never bring God into this. If you look at any of my scientific papers, I don't bring God into this.
So when creationists complain about methodological naturalism, they have to throw James Tour under the bus as well. The reason we engage in methodological naturalism in science is we have no known way to test the supernatural. Period. And James Tour explicitly explains this.
Purely naturalistic explanation. I never bring God into this.
In fact, Tour seems so bent upon denying the accusation of being an intelligent design proponent, he brings it up again in the debate. 9 minutes and 38 seconds in, he's quoting the host when he says,
You said, James Tour, quote, fits with the intelligent design view. You cannot get a naturalistic explanation that does justice to the origin of life. There's too much improbability, too much complexity. Unquote. So that's what you were suggesting that I speak on. And that's just not true.
Interesting. So James Tour explicitly rejects yet again the idea that, quote, you cannot get a naturalistic explanation that does justice to the origin of life. There's too much improbability, too much complexity. I don't think that he would be objecting to just the part of the sentence where he says the label intelligent design and not the other part of the sentence where he says you cannot get a naturalistic explanation that does justice to the origin of life. There's too much improbability, too much complexity. I'm not sure why he would mention that part if he didn't object to it being an idea that's assigned to the label intelligent design that's being assigned to him, which he objects to. At 7 minutes 44 seconds, James Tour says it's impossible to separate out amino acids. They buy purified mixtures. This is a minor contradiction. Obviously, if labs can purify mixtures, there exists a chemical and or physical pathway to separate out left-handed and right-handed enantiomers, and there are several known ways nature can do this, and we know nature has. Tour also mentions difficulties separating sugars, while lipid membranes are most permeable to ribose, so the sugar nucleotides are made from. What a coincidence that the components of life are self-associating in natural conditions. They discuss autocatalytic processes, which Tour says is not significant in abiogenesis research, but that's actually a key component for life. One of the models of a protocell is a chemoton, which is just a series of autocatalytic reactions. Autocatalysis is interesting to study because it's a system of self-replicating molecules that contain basic information to make a more complex structure, and they can form without that information in the first place. It's proven to be possible for complex self-replicating information to form without that information, so you don't require that information to exist in order to create that information naturally. The same principles would be at work for prebiotic materials, so it's a perfectly valid line of research for origin of life. James also talks about protocells. Protocells have not successfully been shown to be able to evolve into true life, but what creationists tend to not understand about protocells is that they're just a step on the spectrum to life, not life itself. They might only need the right RNA that we haven't discovered yet that can self-replicate in the right ways, in the right conditions. How many billions of experiments every minute of every day over millions of years did the Earth get to have in order to get it right? And how many experiments have we mere humans done? By the way, there have been protocells made that arguably have aspects of life, including self-replication and metabolic activity and the production of amino acids and other organic molecules. Some contain genetic materials, some swap genetic material, and in some cases all it needed was some chemicals in a flask and some maybe light to activate it. What we did get into in this debate, which I'd like to reiterate really quickly if you'll indulge me, is that James Tour explicitly confirms old Earth and that simple life arose from simple chemistry, and that's recorded in the fossil record. 22 minutes in, Lee says,
no, I would agree with you, there is no evidence about what sequence of small molecules were there, but was there a super simple molecules there on Earth at the beginning? Yes. And we can trace it back to the Big Bang, where there we have proof that there was a Big Bang, and then we have stars forming, and those stars explode, and when those stars explode, they produce elements in their elemental form, and when they accrete on a planet, they then gain complexity.
You are the authority here. When you tell him, he asked you specifically, he says there was a primordial soup and life came forth, and your very simple cells came forth from this. We have no evidence how this thing happened. Lots of small molecules. You know, a cell's pretty complex.
We don't know how it happened, but the evidence on Earth says in the fossil record that life appeared very, very quickly, okay, after the late heavy bombardment. So that is evidence in the fossil record that is not disputable. I think we both agree, planet Earth formed, rocks, simple chemistry, no life. Right? We don't know all the details of that, but then within a few 100 million years, there's evidence in the fossil record that life formed, simple cellular life. Those two facts are not, as far as I know, disputed by
those are not contestable. Those are not contestable. How we got from the point A to point B?
Absolutely, but I did not say
okay.
We knew.
Right. So we're agree. Okay. You and I agree, Lee, that how we got from the simple molecules to life, it happened, but we don't know how. Okay.
You and I agree, Lee, that how we got from the simple molecules to life, it happened.
This already contradicts about 99% of all intelligent design and creationist proponents. Tony refused to answer whether he agreed on those terms, most likely because he doesn't, and Tor does.
Evidence on Earth says in the fossil record that life appeared very, very quickly, okay, after the late heavy bombardment. So that is evidence in the fossil record that is not disputable. I think we both agree, planet Earth formed, rocks, simple chemistry, no life. Right? We don't know all the details of that, but then within a few 100 million years, there's evidence in the fossil record that life formed, simple cellular life. Those two facts are not, as far as I know, disputed by
those are not contestable.
This doesn't seem to be a refutation of abiogenesis. In fact, it seems like a hesitant affirmation with the caveat, we don't know how. Simple molecules to simple life. These are his words. Why would there need to be simple molecules to simple life? God could just poof simple life into existence without any prerequisites. He could just poof in advanced life too. But either way, this is a complete contradiction of Tony and his creationist cohort's positions, that life could not have formed naturally from chemistry, and more specifically that James Tour himself debunks this possibility. He doesn't, he only points out the obvious, that we don't know how it happened. Obviously, Tony deflected away from this very quickly. He also ignores the fact that he doesn't know how God created life either. But of course, the fact that he can't answer that doesn't preclude the option that that happened, even though he thinks that scientists not knowing how abiogenesis works means that that's impossible. So Tony's claims are entirely fallacious. He's got 4 basic claims. 1, that abiogenesis is impossible. You cannot conclude that because something hasn't been discovered that it's impossible. Yet that's all he has, really. A subject under review that is always progressing is not evidence that the related hypothesis is impossible. The fact that we don't know how to do something is not evidence that it can't be done. The fact that we've progressed so far is an indication it probably can be done. And in the fossil record and from meteorite evidence, it suggests strongly that it did happen, even if we don't know how. James Tour explicitly says that science can't rule it out and cannot show that God did it. 2. All experiments are abiotically or early Earth implausible. There are several experiments, too many to count, that are abiotically plausible. Tony likes to paint them all as abiotically implausible because there are some that are really contrived or unnatural, and others are simply highly controlled for ease of study and to eliminate variables. 3. The only thing that produces life is life. Tony believes a non-living being, God, created life, and so he has broken his own rule. God brought life from non-life. So, of course, with special pleading, you can always make exceptions to your absolute declarations and still think you're right. 4. Abiogenesis is an atheist talking point. Abiogenesis is supported by the vast majority of scientists, including theists of all religions, and the majority of the public looking at the science, whom are also a majority God believers. The Christian position is not exclusively creationist, nor is methodological naturalism exclusively atheist, as James Tour himself explicitly says he's a methodological naturalist.
I use purely naturalistic explanations for what I have to say about the evidence.
Purely naturalistic.
Many atheists do not believe in abiogenesis, for the record, though it is the exception. Tour has legitimate points, but acts like he's the only one calling this out. No, biochemists are actively working on these things, and none of them declare abiogenesis solved. Tony acts like this is some hidden secret that only creationists have the balls to say. This is a complete and utter straw man and an attempt to poison the well.
One other thing James Tour tends to talk about is the unlikelihood of a cell spontaneously assembling, but he's actually talking about modern cells, not the experimental and theoretical minimal protocell models, which do not require membrane proteins, or even proteins at all. There are ways that protocells can exchange materials without surface lipid proteins, and there are ways RNA can replicate without proteins.
So I'm not a biologist.
Dr. Tour may in fact be an ID proponent in private, as Tony claims, but he certainly doesn't think he can get away with saying so in public. He's at least smart enough to be embarrassed enough not to openly spew academically embarrassing God of the Gaps arguments. So this either means Tony is deluded or his idol is a blatant liar and public betrayer of what they privately agree upon. Either way, not so good for Trashfire Tony.
We don't know how to build cells from the bottom up. We are researching how, and we keep getting new pieces of the puzzle. We know how nature can make the basic components. It's just a question of how they can be arranged naturally. Tony wants us to just give up and admit defeat, probably because he's afraid that solving abiogenesis will damage his faith. That's pretty weak faith if you can only believe in a God if abiogenesis is false. Plenty of Christians believe in a God who made a clockwork universe capable of bringing forth life by its own God-programmed laws. In fact, that would be a much smarter God with a way more calculations, specified complexity, and foresight put into the design. But Tony believes it is best to back his reasoning by the God of the Gaps fallacy, as usual. Enjoy the debate. I mean, dumpster fire.
And the one and only Snake was right. They're going to be discussing the one and only Dr. James Tour, and I think Snake is planning on unveiling some things that he thinks they're going to debunk some of Dr. Tour's positions. I believe Tony's going to counter them, and we're going to kind of review some different videos of interviews and interactions with Dr. Tour and other folks, and should be fun. So keep your hands on the wheel, everybody. I'm sure we will get into some entertainment this evening, and should be some fun time. So Tony and Snake, welcome to the stream. Hope you guys are having a good night so far. Had a good weekend. Had a Merry Christmas. Snake, thanks for joining us. Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell people what you're wanting to accomplish tonight.
Well, I think the title of the debate is a little mislabeled. I never once told Tony I was going to debunk anything that James Tour said what I did say, well, essentially I was challenged by Tony to go watch the James Tour and Lee Cronin debate and give my thoughts on it, and so that's what I'm going to do. Obviously, he thought James Tour debunked abiogenesis and possibly would convert me to Christianity. And I don't know how many times I corrected Tony in our email exchanges. I never said I was going to try and debunk James Tour, but, so I'm here to debunk Tony and his idea that James Tour somehow helps any of Tony's arguments. And so I'm not surprised that he also did not understand what happened during the Tour and Cronin discussion either. And then I guess we can get into that, but that's about brings us up to speed right there.
Okay. Tony, welcome to the stream, my friend. How are you doing?
All right. Thanks for having me.
Give me a response to that, since we might as well kick things off with some fun. So what are your thoughts on what Snake just said?
Well, we're all in agreement with Tor, so Snake is delusional as always. But yeah, we can get into some clips, and then Snake can, I don't know, debunk them and try to make his abiogenesis fantasy land sound more plausible.
Okay. So before we get into all that, and I've got the, I guess we'll pull up the Cronin and Tour interaction over on Unbelievable first. Before we get into that, so Snake, do you, since we're talking about PhDs at this time, do you accept the response by Dr. Seigart earlier tonight about the genetic code, or are you still holding the position that it's not a code?
I'm working on that response right now. It's not a code in how you guys use it. That was my whole point.
So you don't think, from an information and communication theory perspective, you do not view it as a code?
You're gonna have to give me your definition of what a code is. Are we having that debate now?
No, I'm just asking because that happened earlier today. I'm just asking a direct question. Like, do you claim that from information communication theory? I mean, there's like gigantic papers on like code, and are you stating that the genetic code does not fulfill those requirements?
There's a genetic code. It's not the kind of code that you guys want to make it out to be, and
what am I making it out to be exactly?
Like a programming language.
Okay, so code is different than a programming language, although programming languages are dependent upon code, and from a communication theory perspective. Now, that said, there are you can go down the rabbit hole of it also being a programming language, but that's separate from whether or not it's a literal code from a communication theory perspective first. So what I'm asking you is, are you debunking that it is a code itself? There's programming languages. Being a coder and coding from the modern sense is different than what a code is. So separating from programming language, are you saying that it is or is not an actual code?
There's a genetic code, but it depends. Genetic code is different from programming codes.
Well, we're not talking about programming codes. We're talking about literal codes.
So the point is, I disagree on some of the semantics that Sai would use, but overall he's mostly has good points, and I mostly agree with him. The point that I want to, a lot of us get stuck on is pointing out the differences in genetic code and these other codes that are being equated to genetic code and DNA, and they're often confused.
So are you? So hang on. So are you saying that from a communication theory perspective that Morse code and the genetic code are not the same type of code?
There are differences, but it's more equivalent to an alphabet, the genetic code.
So you do realize that one of the fundamental requirements of code is that there's a source code and a translated code, right? Like there's two finite sets. Like every single code that's ever existed has to have that in order to be considered a code function.
Sure. So are we having this? I thought we were having a different debate.
I'm just intrigued because I'm just fascinated that a PhD biochemist weighs in on the conversation, and you're still not wanting to concede that point.
No.
Well, interesting. Well, yeah, this will be
It's
fun.
not a point that he contradicted, so.
It's not a point. Okay, whatever. Okay, so Tony, which video we wanted to get into first?
I did want to do the first one I sent you, the 22-minute one. The first 6 minutes, we can do it in 2-minute segments, and then Snake can comment, and then we'll go to the Cronin one.
Okay. 1 second.
Every chemist, by the way, is in agreement with Tor. They disagree with him on there's a God or not, but as far as the chemistry being highly contrived and manipulated, there's no disagreement.
Did you not listen to me? I told you this multiple times in emails, and I just said it again. I'm not here to debunk anything Tor said.
We're all in agreement with Tor.
You're not, but that's great.
Oh, we're not?
Hopefully.
How are we not in
have
agreement
that
with him?
on record, and we can go back to that.
Okay. All right.
We're all.
All right, we're gonna go. Let's go ahead and we'll get this video started, and then we'll get into more details that come. Whoa, what just happened there? That's not what I wanted to share.
I'm a synthetic organic chemist. Origin of life is purely synthetic organic chemistry. There's no way around it. I am perfectly situated to be commenting on this, to be critiquing the origin of life research. It is abiological. It is before biology takes over. This is purely synthetic organic chemistry. And making these compounds is very simple. 4 classes of compounds. You have to make them from what's available on a presumed prebiotic Earth. And so the chemistry is not hard for a synthetic organic chemist to follow. And any trained synthetic organic chemist can follow me on this. And I've never seen a synthetic organic chemist disagree with me on this. In fact, the people that might disagree with me are biologists because they've never made anything. The only thing they may have made is they buy a kit and they make it, which is made by chemists. But they've never made anything ab initio. And so it's the synthetic chemist that can critique origin of life research better than anyone else. So go ahead. Ask your synthetic chemist friends to listen to what I have to say. If they have anywhere a master's degree or beyond in synthetic organic chemistry, have them critique what I say.
You want to stop it there?
Do not know how to build even a simple bacterium. The simplest.
Go ahead, Snake.
What do you want me to say about it?
I don't know. You tell us. That's what you're here to do.
I'm here to talk about the James Tor Lee Cronin discussion.
Yeah, we're going to get to that, but you just heard what he had to say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so go ahead. Are you in disagreement with any of that?
No, really.
Wow. Okay. I guess keep playing it. You have nothing then to say.
Are we just going to be watching this video, or are we going to get to the video we came here to talk about?
Yeah, we're going to get to the Tor Cronin, but you're the one that doesn't agree with us, and we agree with Tor. So, what are you here to show?
But we'll get to that.
Oh, I don't agree with Tor?
Not fully.
On what exactly?
We'll get to that as soon as we get to the actual discussion we came here to talk about.
This is all part of it.
It's not. It's literally not the discussion we're here to talk about.
Yeah, but this is what I'm here to talk about. This is what we've been emailing back and forth.
No,
you did
not.
this with
We've been emailing back and forth about the Lee Cronin and James Tor
discussion. This is
and
we're going to get to that shortly. This is all part of the origin of life chemistry and all the problems.
That's categorically not what we were emailing about. But go on.
You are truly delusional.
Is this the discussion we've been emailing about?
This is all part of origin of life problems.
Yes or no?
Yeah, I mentioned Tor. I mentioned his other videos.
This is a completely different video, and it does not have
I mentioned his other videos.
You're categorically wrong.
Dude, you are a fool.
Okay, guys, calm down. All right, let's continue on.
Bacterium with its 256 protein coding genes, we have no idea how to build it. First of all, we don't know how to build the molecules, the 4 classes of molecules that are needed for it.
We don't know how to, even if we had those 4 classes of molecules, assemble them even into the simplest of bacteriums. We don't know how to do that. One can do that with the technologies we have today. We can make technologies, but we can't even make the simplest bacterium. Anybody who would say something contrary does not know what they are talking about. Show me the demonstration. Nobody has ever done it. And it's not because of lack of effort. It's not because of lack of will. First of all, they haven't been able to get the molecules to do this. And if they could make the molecules, even if we were to give them the molecules, they wouldn't have the information. There would be no inherent information in the DNA. But even if we gave them the DNA in the structure that they wanted, they wouldn't know how to put all the components together because of the sophistication within a cell. The interactomes, meaning that the interacted connectivity between the molecules, the van der Waals interactions, all of these have to be in the right place and in the right order for a cell to function. We don't even know how to define life, let alone knowing how to spark it to begin.
Do you think that any origin of life scientists claim that they've solved the origin of life?
No, but what you're trying to put forth is...
Do you think that I believe that?
You believe in abiogenesis, correct?
I believe it's the more likely answer, yes.
Okay, well, it's plagued with problems.
I do not believe that it's been demonstrated.
Right, and it's plagued with problems, and no one has ever even come close to it.
Okay, and so therefore it's impossible? So you think that because we don't know something now, that we can never figure it out? Is that your argument?
You're gonna compare this to what? Your space shuttle?
I asked you a question.
Yeah, no. They're not making any progress.
They're not making any progress?
No.
So when they make progress and publish a paper on it, that's not progress?
What papers? Because everything has been failing.
They publish papers on this every year.
On what? On what scenario?
They learn more and more about abiogenesis.
The unstable RNA world that hasn't gone anywhere.
Are you actually denying that they haven't published any papers on origin of life?
Hypothetical bullshit that's gone nowhere. Hypothetical nonsense that's been failing for decades.
So be specific. Have they or have they not published papers on origin of life?
Of course, all the time, and it's not working.
So that's progress.
No, that's not progress.
That is. We know more about it. That's progress.
Guesses that haven't developed into anything is not progress.
So are you saying that if we don't know everything, if we can't do it now, we'll never be able to do it?
You have high hopes for it.
That has nothing to do with it. What is your
they're
answer
not
to my
making
question?
progress.
What is your answer to my question?
I already told you. No, it's not making progress.
You didn't. Quit beating around the bush. Quit avoiding the
question.
No,
you're the one tap dancing because you know there's no evidence.
Answer the question.
I already did. No, they're not.
It's a yes or no question. Do you believe that if we don't know how to do it now, that we'll never know how to do it?
Yeah, we'll never know how to do it. That's my position. And actually, Tor says the same thing.
That's not what I asked.
That's my answer. So if you want to disagree, listen. If you want to live in your delusional
question until you answer.
I said no. It's impossible.
Do you believe? I'm not talking about abiogenesis. I'm talking about in general. Do you believe that if we don't know how to do something now, that we'll never know how to do it?
With abiogenesis, yeah, never. It's failing.
That's not what I asked.
You can believe in the future that it's going to be proven. That's your belief.
That's not what I asked, is it?
Dude, if you want to play a game for 2 hours, I'm not going to.
Do I have to ask?
I already answered you.
Do I have to ask?
I already answered you. The chemistry has been shown to not work. If you want to believe it can happen in the future, that's your belief.
All right, okay, guys, let's continue on.
I'm not going to continue until he answers the question.
He's giving you his answer.
No, he hasn't. That's not
when
an
one
answer.
looks at a typical.
All right, dude. If you want to act like a little mental case and not listen, then there's nothing else to discuss, Snake. I've already answered you. It's impossible.
You haven't answered me.
I said it's impossible today and in the future.
You said abiogenesis is impossible.
Yes.
Do you believe that if we don't know how to do something now, that it's impossible that we'll ever know how to do it?
Yes, because it's made no progress whatsoever.
I didn't ask you about abiogenesis.
I don't believe it's ever going to be solved.
And we already established that it's made progress.
Hang on. Both of you be quiet. I'm going to... Tony, I believe what he's asking is he's asking you a hypothetical and not necessarily in relation to abiogenesis. He's asking, just because we don't know how to do something now, in general sense, does that mean that we might never know how to do it? Is what he's asking.
Yeah, it's always going to be impossible. That's my answer. I'm going to fly to the moon with just flapping my arms, and I'm going to write a paper on it. I can't do it today, but I might do it in 10 years.
Okay, let's continue.
You do realize that we haven't known how to do things, and then we learned how to do it.
Okay, guys, we're going to move on now.
Yeah, with intelligence. With lots of intelligence. That's how we got into the moon, not by accident.
Some prehistoric pond, and molecules and those molecules coming together and forming a cell, and those cells coming together and some slithering creature coming out of this pond. That is fallacious. There is no truth in that. We don't even know how to make the molecules. We are lost on how to do this. We can't even make the basic building blocks. But even if we could, from prebiotic type environment to make these, with all the intellect that we put into this, even if we could make them, we have no idea how to assemble them. You say, well, we can make the liposome, the cell membrane. We cannot. There's over 40,000 lipids have been identified in cell membranes. You want to take some simple ones? It's not just individual lipid membranes. You have to have the inside and the outside of the membrane have to be different. You have to have this huge array of proteins, that transmembrane proteins, and you have to have carbohydrates on the surface as identifiers. Even in the simplest bacterium, we have no idea how to put this structure together. It's not there. So not only do we not know how to make the basic components, we do not know how to build the structure, even if we were given the basic components. So the Gedanken experiment is this: even if I gave you all the components, even if I gave you all the amino acids, all the protein structures from those amino acids that you wanted, all the lipids in the purity that you wanted, the DNA, the RNA, even in the sequence that you wanted. So I'm even giving you the code. And so now I say, and all the nucleic acids, can you now assemble a cell here in your individual bodies, not in your individual laboratories, not in a prebiotic cesspool, but in your nice laboratory? And the answer is a resounding no. And if anybody claims otherwise, they do not know this area.
Yeah, no one disputes that. We haven't created life from scratch. Do you think that anyone is arguing that?
Well, I think what he was Tour was talking about right there was the lipids in the cell membrane, which are very commonly spewed talking points. And I'm pretty sure I've heard them out of your mouth. So
no, you haven't. The problem there is he's talking about complex cells, and origin of life researchers are focusing on like simple cells.
They can't do that either. You had this same nonsense with Otangelo.
He specifically stated simple lipids in terms of the simple cell membrane. That's what he was referring to.
He was talking about a bacterium, which is a very complex cell.
In that little segment that just ran, he literally was talking about how having a simple membrane that didn't have all the other stuff was still
of a modern cell. Yeah.
No. That's being referred to in terms of the, okay. Do we need to rewind it?
Yeah, rewind it, because that's right. What he was saying was the minimal amount.
Bacterium. He'll say it.
And we can give Kevin all the amino acids and everything's needed.
A prebiotic cesspool, but in your nice laboratory. And the answer is a resounding no. And if anybody claims otherwise, they do not know this area.
Yeah, like Snake, who doesn't know what he's talking about.
This is how far the misunderstanding.
No one claims that we've solved
hang on, I can go back for it.
The origin of life, except for you guys, at least.
But we're nowhere close.
All the protein structures from those amino acids that you wanted, all the lipids in the purity that you wanted, the DNA, the RNA, even in the sequence that you wanted. So I'm even giving you the code. And so now I say, and all the nucleic acids. Can you now assemble a cell here in your individual bodies, not in your individual laboratories, not in a prebiotic cesspool, but in your nice laboratory? And the answer is a resounding no. And if anybody claims otherwise, they do not know this area.
Where was the PC we just talking about?
Even if we could, from prebiotic type environment to make these, with all the intellect that we put into this, even if we could make them, we have no idea how to assemble them. You say, well, we can make the liposome, the cell membrane. We cannot. There's over 40,000 lipids have been identified in cell membranes. You want to take some simple ones? It's not just individual lipid membranes. You have to have the inside and the outside of the membrane have to be different. You have to have this huge array of proteins, that transmembrane proteins, and you have to have carbohydrates on the surface as identifiers. Even in the simplest bacterium, we have.
Okay, so you may have missed it, but he literally just said, "Oh, you want simple membranes."
No, he said he's talking about cells that exist today.
No, he's saying
yes,
no.
He
said no. Then he said, "Do you want to let's just take simple," and that he's referring directly to we just have this one that doesn't have to have portals, doesn't have to have anything else, just has to be enough to protect. What the point he's making about the inside and the outside have to be different is to solve the water paradox. Like that's what he's talking about. Even if it's,
he said there's over 40,000 lipids in a.
No, what? Okay, see, obviously we're not paying attention to what he said.
I don't remember the exact
He then
number,
said,
no.
he's like, they said, okay, you don't want that? Let's look at a simple membrane. That's where he made a transition from the 40,000 that are required in the modern cell to, okay, let's just have a simple one. That's all you want? You just want something to protect. That's to solve one of the many paradoxes. is, oh, if we have a membrane, oh, then we
said
can escape the we can escape the sunlight, the UV problem, and all those other different things. If we just have all we have to have is a simple membrane. That's the point that's spewed many times, and I'm pretty sure you brought this up in the debate with me.
The only time he said simple was when he said the simplest bacterium, which is a modern organism.
Actually, he said that after. Man, you really aren't paying attention. Let's go on to the next. I'm going to stay out of this and let you guys go.
Go back. Seriously. If you want to be proven wrong.
Okay.
That is fallacious. There is no truth in that. We don't even know how to make the molecules. We are lost on how to do this. We can't even make the basic building blocks. But even if we could, from prebiotic type environment to make these, with all the intellect that we put into this, even if we could make them, we have no idea how to assemble them. You say, well, we can make the liposome, the cell membrane. We cannot. There's over 40,000 lipids.
Oh wait, let's look at the CC. You want to take some simple ones.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's he talking about?
Been identified.
He's talking about membranes.
What is he talking about, though?
Membranes.
Play it.
In cell membranes. You want to take some simple ones? It's not just individual lipid membranes. You have to have the inside and the outside of the membrane have to be different. You have to have.
Okay.
He's gonna say back to simplest bacterium.
That's after he's talking about just a simple membrane.
This huge array of proteins, that transmembrane proteins, and you have to have carbohydrates on the surface as identifiers.
Okay, so transmembrane proteins, okay, and the carbohydrates on the surface, the identifiers in the simplest bacterium. Okay, that's after talking about just having the simplest membranes, which in the context of abiogenesis research, which is the entire point of this video that he's talking about, it is claimed ad nauseum by you yourself, Snake, on multiple occasions that all you have to have is a simple membrane. Doesn't have to have any of this stuff that he's talking about, and it can survive.
No, I said that's what they're looking into as the starting point. And he's not talking about a protocell, because there aren't protocells with 40,000 lipids
Okay,
in them.
he literally annihilates protocells on many occasions. So
I'm sure he does.
Protocells aren't even alive.
Because we haven't made protocells living.
We're going to read the same thing. Let's go on to the next stage, guys.
Lipids in the purity that you wanted, the DNA, the RNA, even in the sequence that you wanted. So I'm even giving you the coding. And so now I say, and all the nucleic acids, can you now assemble a cell here in your individual bodies, not in your individual laboratories, not in a prebiotic cesspool, but in your nice laboratory? And the answer is a resounding no. And if anybody claims otherwise, they do not know this area. This is how far the misunderstanding has gone. Even science professors, even biology professors, think that there is a near building of life, that we understand all the ways to build life. We do not. Not only have none of the molecules been made ab initio under prebiotic-like conditions to make the homochiral molecules that are made. Remember, we need 4 classes of molecules. We need the nucleic acids, and then the homochiral systems that for the amino acids, which then need to be built up into protein structures. We need the carbohydrates, which have to be built up into the polycarbohydrate structures. And then we need the lipids, which also are chiral. All of these we need in homochiral form. We don't know how to do this in any prebiotic type scenario at all. These have not been made. And then to assemble these into a cell, it's never been done. So there's a gross misunderstanding. And this misunderstanding has come because of the projections of those who work in the area of origin of life. They do one little thing and then they extrapolate it. And then they work with the press to ramp it up even more. And they project as if they really know it. And so the layperson reads this and says, you see, scientists understand. And then it's not just the layperson. Scientists think that other scientists understand all of this. But they do not. There's a great negative outcome of this beyond just leading the audience, leading the general public astray. What happens ultimately is you end up with 100 million people in the United States that no longer believe this. And then you have the scientific elite saying, why is there 100 million people that don't buy into this? And that distrust will go beyond just that particular topic. It will extend into other topics. And so it yields a distrust of science.
Yeah, that's a great point. There shouldn't be misinformation about science because that leads to people not believing the real science.
Tony, do you have anything you want to weigh in there?
It's been exaggerated by the media, of course.
Yeah, very exaggerated. Also by internet atheists.
I'm sure there are some, yeah.
Why don't James Torr's email is public. You should just debate him, man.
I don't have much to do.
I have his email. Okay, well, you can debate him on protocells or all this progress that you think is making such advancements.
Does he really have nothing better to do than talk to me?
You're a waste of time, I agree, but he might. Go on, man. Maddox.
Some people argue that since there's been hundreds of millions of years available, the probability that there's the chance that these things could happen in hundreds of millions of years. But that's not true. Time actually can be an enemy when it comes to organic synthesis. Prebiotic synthesis is before biology. So one has to make chemicals. Many of the chemicals that need to be made for life are kinetic products, meaning that they're not the most thermodynamically stable form. For example, carbohydrates, which is the main class of compounds. These are the units that hook together DNA. These are the units that have identifying aspects on cell structure. These are the units that the cell is going to need for the energy of life. Carbohydrates are kinetic products, meaning that if they should form, they would decompose. They decompose over time. In relatively short amounts of time, they decompose. The very reactions that make them, unless somebody is there to pull them out, to fish them out, to stop the process and put them in a bottle under inert conditions in a freezer. And not just one, there's many, many different types you have to do this. They end up going through a process of what's referred to as caramelization, meaning that they polymerize. They polymerize. The very aldol reactions that were used to make them just continue. And you get polyaldols, you get polycondensation reactions, and they caramelize. Or they undergo, with formaldehyde, which is a presumed prebiotic chemical, they undergo rapid Cannizzaro reactions. So the aldehyde is oxidized to formic acid, and this nice carbohydrate that you made has just been reduced. So the aldehyde from the carbohydrate has gone back to an alcohol. So there's competing reactions. So time does not solve the issue. The other problem is if you had 400 million years to get to a certain point in the synthesis of a particular class of compounds, now you run out of material. Anytime you do synthesis, you run out of material, even when you've optimized the yields, and you got to go back to the beginning. Well, say it took you 400 million years to get to a certain point on a synthesis. Now you have to go back and make more. But how do you go back and make more? Because nature never kept a laboratory notebook. Doesn't know how to go back. Never kept a record. So even if it could make more, it doesn't know how to. So it's got to start all over again somehow. But it doesn't know how to start over again. Doesn't know why to start over again because it doesn't know what it's going toward. So if you look at it, people have been trying for a long time. If we just take Miller-Urey as the first example, where Miller and Urey took some basic chemicals that are presumed on a prebiotic earth, hydrogen cyanide, formaldehyde, and CO2, and they put those across a high voltage, simulating lightning, you can get some racemic amino acids out of those. But those racemic amino acids were racemic. Okay, that was in 1952. That was 2/3 of a century ago. What has happened in 2/3 of a century since Miller-Urey in other fields? Well, we've had human spaceflight. We have satellite connectivity. We have the internet. We have the entire silicon era of microchips, and we have computer technology. We have all of this. In the same 66 years, 2/3 of a century, we are still exactly where Miller and Urey were. We make a barrage of stereo-scrambled chemicals, nowhere close to even knowing how to make them and hook them together. They got to get hooked together in the proper order. We are clueless on this, clueless, because time doesn't solve this. Even with all our ingenuity, time is not going to solve the problem. You let these chemicals that have been made, you let them sit around, even for months, and you can look even in the origin of life researchers themselves. When they've let these go for weeks, they show the degradation of these in a period of weeks. Weeks is the twinkling of an eye when it comes to prebiotic timescales. The chemicals decompose. The environment for the chemicals, environment rich in ammonia, is going to turn carbonyls into imines. This is going to cause further destruction. The ammonia environment itself is quite basic. You're going to have extended aldol reactions coming on. So to think that the molecules could be made and sit there waiting for other molecules to come in, it doesn't happen. Organic chemistry doesn't work that way. Any student that is lazy enough to set up reactions and like to go home for the weekend without working them up pays the price for that, with a depressed yield generally. As soon as the reactions are done, or as soon as what you want is the optimized yield, you have to stop that reaction, get it away from the starting materials, or else what happens is it goes on to polymerized product. Especially when you're making kinetic products, which is not the thermodynamically most stable product, which is exactly what you get in many of the chemicals that are needed for life. So time is actually the enemy.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, and that's the point of if we don't know how to do something today, we might know
we're
how to
gonna
do it later on.
Okay, let us know when that happens. Let us know, man.
Yeah, should we just not look into it because we haven't figured it out yet?
Keep looking into it.
Should we just stop?
No, but the problem is all they're showing is intelligent agency is required. But yeah, let me know when you can do it under a prebiotic environment.
Intelligent agents haven't even done it, so.
Sure, but what they have shown requires it.
The other point is degradation is brought up as this huge roadblock, and it sounds nice at first, but if there's a chemical system that's creating these chemicals, it can just keep creating it, even though the ones that it created like 5 minutes or 10 days ago, if those degrade, well, it's still pumping out new ones all the time.
And they're constantly turning. Yeah, boy, you don't listen.
Sometimes it'll run out of that fuel source.
Yeah, you don't listen.
There's other places on the planet.
What I'm going to do, in all my power, I'm going to email James Tor tomorrow, and I'm going to try to set up a debate directly with him and
What am I going to debate? What do you think I'm going to debate him on? What's the topic?
Just all this stuff that you think is going to be proven, and it's so plausible.
What's the proposition of the debate?
Are you scared to talk to him?
No, I'm asking you what the proposition of the debate would be.
I just told you, don't tap dance.
Okay, well, maybe I didn't catch it. What's the proposition?
Well, then you got something wrong with your ears, man.
What's the proposition?
Snake, if you think I'm going to do what you did with Otangelo for 2 hours, dude, you really got some problems. You need to go play with your little Star Wars toys or something.
Do you have a problem with movie memorabilia?
All right, this is.
What's the proposition? Right. You didn't tell me one, did you?
Okay, guys.
That's why you won't tell me.
You said the molecules are not going to degrade and disperse. They just they're pumping out into the earth. All this stuff is plausible someday. Why don't you debate this one-on-one with Tor?
What would be the proposition?
Abiogenesis problem is what we've been discussing for 34 minutes, man.
That's not a proposition.
Well, I think what the real point that needs to be made here is, and the question would be, in that last segment, Tor just explained why the time factor works against abiogenesis, and then he put it into context of actual real-world chemistry, and how if you aren't stopping things at the specific points, then they just degrade, and you have to start over again. So even if you are pumping more things out, you still have to have everything timed perfectly, which is the entire point he was making.
Mm-hmm. But if it happens over millions of years, then
he just said it
perfect
couldn't.
Timing might be actually.
Oh, it might.
As rare as you think.
Yeah, it might. Okay, right. Okay, Snake. You want to go on, Maddox? Yeah, what a moron.
Yeah, you can't just tell me that it can't happen
There have
just
been
because
many
it
people that have tried
degrades.
in origin of life research to make the chemical building blocks for life.
I was saying
the vast
something, but
majority
whatever.
of the chemical building blocks are chiral, which means that they have a non-superimposable mirror image, just like our hands. The left hand and the right hand are non-superimposable mirror images. They're mirror images, but they can't be superimposed, and that's why a left-handed glove doesn't fit on the right hand. The vast majority of biological molecules are handed like that. To make them handed is difficult. We know how to do that in synthetic chemistry. It's never easy. Using prebiotic environment, it's never been successful. Some have said, well, this could happen on a chiral crystal. One can get small enhancements, but not nearly what you need, and it's never been demonstrated, even with all the intellect that people have put behind trying to do this with chiral crystals and chiral layered environments and chiral clay environments. The chemicals that are needed for life are more than just carbon and water. The structures that are needed, one needs the amino acids. The amino acids then have to hook together to form proteins. It's not easy to get amino acids to hook together. One can get very small amounts if you just add a catalyst to it, but the yields are extremely low. There are many activation steps that are needed to get this efficiently. In nature, in biology, once you have life, this is all done with nature's little nanomachines called enzymes. But what we're talking about is prebiotic, long before enzymes themselves are made, and the enzymes themselves are made out of the amino acids and proteins. Then after we have the amino acids, we've got to have the carbohydrates. The carbohydrates are another class of molecules. And then you have to hook the carbohydrates together. The carbohydrate hooking together pattern is extremely complex. Just the carbohydrate, the simple carbohydrate, D-mannose. If you just make 6 units of that D-mannose, that D-mannose can be hooked together in over 1 trillion different combinations, depending on how they're branched and what the constitution is of the primary linkage point. Over 12 trillion combinations, and only one works. Only one will work. How do you get that? Now, you also have to have the lipids. The lipids have to have 2 tails, not 1. If you have the monoacyl lipid, that destabilizes any lipid bilayer. And these also have chiral centers. Again, how is that done in a prebiotic system? Nobody knows. And then you have to have the nucleic acids. So you have to have the nucleobases, and those nucleobases have to somehow hook very cleanly to a carbohydrate that had to independently be made. And then you have your nucleotide that then had, with a phosphate group on there, that then has to hook together. Again, that's only done by enzymes. We don't know how to do that cleanly before there's enzymes. All of those pieces we don't know how to make, let alone hook together.
You want to go to the Cronin?
It's more just we haven't figured it out yet, so...
Yeah, we're going to figure it out. I know. You want to go to the Cronin video, Maddox?
No,
I know, someday. 20,000 years.
How about I respond to it?
Sure.
Yeah, so we don't know how it's done, and we're looking into it, but fortunately we know it is done. We have meteorites that have overwhelmingly one type of chirality. So we know that chemistry can do this.
They don't hook together, though.
We don't know
And
how.
no, they're actually racemic. Did you listen to him?
Did you listen to me?
You don't know anything. Did you listen to Tor? Are you a PhD chemist, by the way?
No. But
Okay, so shut your mouth and listen. How about that?
How about you let me speak?
You just did, and he just explained
No,
to you
and
how
you
that
just
doesn't
ignored
work.
it because you're not capable of like absorbing
Dude,
new information.
you know what?
So,
Snake,
so the
you
fact
take
that,
classes
no,
just to
no,
argue.
No, no, no,
That's what you do.
No.
No. I'm gonna act like you. No.
Meteors,
No.
you cut me off. You cut me off.
No.
You cut me off.
No. I'm gonna act like you, little retard
guys.
boy. No.
Okay, guys. Hey.
Yeah, it's dumb, dude. You don't have anything. There's no evidence being shown here.
I know, that's what you have to keep saying when you cut me off.
No. I'm gonna act like you.
All right. Hey, okay. Let's move on to Cronin.
No, I was in the middle of something. He cut me off.
Okay, make your point, Tony. Let him make his point, and we'll move on to Cronin.
Okay.
And
Did you miss the fact that we have meteors that have predominantly one chirality of these chemicals?
They don't hook together, and no, they're not. They're actually racemic still. There's been higher and lower yields, but there's never been 100% purity.
Yeah, it doesn't need to be. So we know it can. So we know it can produce
Wow.
different levels of chirality.
Yeah, you live.
We don't
in,
know
you
how.
Live in,
We don't know how to do this, but it
I
happens.
know.
But we know it
Yeah.
happens.
You live in such an incredible fantasy land. It's really great, isn't it, Snake?
Oh, so I just made that up.
You don't listen to anything that Tor said, but I'm gonna try everything to get a debate with him. You can discuss the chirality problem.
What's the
everything else.
proposition?
Okay, we're gonna move on to the current thing that you guys.
Origin of life. Origin of life
That's
problems.
not a proposition. You can't. You don't know anything, dude.
All right, guys, we're moving on to Cronin and Tor.
Build systems that can function and operate as machines where we use, for example, a light input and have those machines operate. More recently, we're having them drill into cells and do cancer treatment in that way. Plus, we have a large program in graphene and carbon materials by this. But professors themselves don't know, and professors themselves are lost in these issues. They think that all of this has been figured out, that carbohydrates came from the foremost reaction and life built up from an RNA world. Because they've never studied it. They were just like me. I had never studied it, and I took these things for granted. I trusted people, and I see that I shouldn't have trusted them because when I looked at the data, it wasn't there. And I wrote one article on the topic, calling people out on it, and then that snowballed from there. I started being invited to give talks on this, and it's interesting that none of my colleagues privately would disagree with me. They'd all agree with me that they didn't know. But I don't personally work in the area of origin of life. Now, you ask whether I'm a Christian. Not only am I Christian, but I love Jesus tremendously. He is the best. He is everything to me. I am much more than just a Christian in name. I come from a Jewish background, so when I came to the Lord at the age of 18, and I came to see that Jesus was the Messiah, it was a huge change. For me, it is not just something in name. So you asked, how does it affect my research? But it affects my research in the way I interact with people. I'm held to a higher standard because of Jesus Christ. I ask God to give me insight, to give me wisdom, to give me creativity in my work. The scriptures are filled with people like Bezalel, where God specifically filled them with the Holy Spirit and gave them wisdom.
Is this relevant?
Exodus chapter 31, across many different disciplines. And so in that sense, I pray and I seek the Lord. But still, that doesn't mean that I have to neglect the bookwork. I mean, I have to study the work. And for me, it's just asking God for wisdom is what it is.
Sure. Let's turn to you now, Lee. So welcome back. We didn't scare you off too much in the last show, I'm glad to say. And it's great to have you back on the program. Just be interested to know what sort of reaction you got from being on the show, whether you kind of heard back from any of your colleagues in the area or others.
All right, so real quick, guys. It appears that the one and only Sal Cordova will be debating the infamous Matt Dillahunty over on Modern Day Debate coming up very soon. Sal just posted a link in the chat, so you definitely want to give yourself a notification for that one. Kudos, Sal. That should be definitely be an interesting debate. Look forward to watching that one. All right, let me see if I can find out where these guys are actually debating their real topic.
It's just the origin of life. There's too much improbability, too much complexity. Unquote. That's what you were suggesting that I speak on. And that's just not true. And then Lee's response to that was, quote, "I'll give you one word, nonsense," unquote. Okay. So you set up this straw man of who Jim Tour is, and then Lee came in and kicked the thing down.
Well, I should just come in there and say, I mean, I think we can discuss about, because you do design what you call nanomachines, but they're not machines. And we can talk about narrative and design and what that means. And I think we can do that in a very productive way. And I think, I mean, Justin can talk about his mischaracterization or not, but what I was saying is actually the whole idea that intelligent design has any scientific basis is, for me, the answer is not just nonsense, but demonstrable nonsense. And we can discuss the reasons for that. And I think actually from some of the things that you're discussing, I think we can agree a lot on that. And it's quite important, I think, from both our point of views, whether you're religious or not, to have a fair and well-grounded debate. And so we can actually make progress.
Well,
I think in the field.
And I will hold my hand up wholeheartedly, Jim, if any misrepresentation took place. I was speaking off the cuff, and in a sense, that's exactly why I've got you on the show today, so that you can speak for yourself and make and be clear on what you actually do believe, what you are saying about the research. Before we come to that, could you, for the sake of people who maybe can't remember or didn't catch the first time round, Lee, just very briefly, what your research essentially boils down to and is saying about how life got going on Earth?
So I'm an organic chemist, and I'm always been faced with the complexity of crazy kind of reactions and understanding what goes on in a reaction vessel in an experiment. And what I was trying to convey in the last discussion is that although the presence of life on Earth seems like it's a miracle of complexity, what I was trying to convey is I think that we have begun to develop a pathway to understanding how that, not only how that complexity arises, but creating that process in the laboratory, not identically, because not about identically kind of trying to check a historical count of a time machine, but showing the laws of what law of the universe allows life to come into being, and to explain that that's just a gradual process. And also, where I think we might vigorously agree, but we'll wait until Jim and I discuss, to express some frustration in the origin of life community, where people set themselves up for an improbable discussion to say, if this molecule was present at this concentration on this day, and then this would happen, and scientists want to have mechanistic control. And I would argue it's not. People aren't being disingenuous. They're just using a narrative to explain their experiments. And this actually is happening in nanotechnology. People building nanomachines? No, they're not. They're looking at the formation of architectures from the top down and bottom up. Same in the origin of life debate. Lots of people are going top down. I think this happens. I imprint my narrative on it. Rather than going bottom up, how do we actually see what features of the universe allow complexity to develop such that evolution can get going? And I think what I can do today is carry on the discussion about how those experiments can be used productively to kind of have a new debate, because it's important for the young scientists coming into this that they don't get sucked in by a narrative, that we ask the question in a new way. And I think, again, I don't want to speak for Jim, but I think he and I might agree on there is a need for displacing a narrative with more interesting and unifying questions.
Let me come back to you first then, Jim. It might be helpful for you to
Okay, you guys have anything you want to weigh in at this point?
Well, I have some clips that I would want to specifically go to. I think that's a good point, and I'm not sure if James actually does agree with that, but that we need to replace the narratives of, it's oversimplified, the primordial ooze. That's not how anyone thinks it happens, and no one should be claiming that they know how it happened. And Lee Cronin makes a great point in saying we have to ask different questions instead of try and prove or tell some sort of narrative.
Yeah, and he basically tells his own narrative. Go on. If you play the video. Everyone in the comments, by the way, agrees with Tor, but go ahead.
He's asking questions of how information arises naturally and how
what he seems to be saying in it.
Okay. And and what life actually is at the chemical level, what it means, because we don't really know what life is. That's why there's debates over whether viruses are alive or not. They're kind of in that gray area.
And equally use this time, feel free to obviously address any other issues that came up in that first recording we did, where you feel either the research or yourself were not being represented adequately.
Yeah, okay, so let me just address that. I think that I was not being represented adequately by you, Justin, and I just corrected that. But also by Lee. Lee's said of me, quote, number one, he's just trying to provoke people to see how they will react, unquote. And that's just not true. That's absolutely not true. I think now that I've sent him my papers and he's read them, he might say, yeah, I'm putting forth arguments. I'm not just trying to elicit a reaction from people. So, but I really want to say also, I respect Lee for coming on here. He is the first origin of life scientist willing to speak to me in a public forum. And others have spoken to me in private, but he's the first one willing to speak to me in a public forum. And I think that that's telling in and of itself that the community is avoiding me, in the sense that they'll avoid a discussion with me on the very topics in which they are publishing. And it's not that I haven't tried to speak with them. So first of all, let me thank Lee for being willing to stand up and do this. And I'd like to just go through and go through step by step the things that I heard in the last program and address these. Because Lee spoke for about 45 minutes in the last program. He said a number of things, and I tried to track with him. I really did want to understand. I tried 4 times to go. I went through 4 times that program. 4 times. That's 4 hours I went through this program to try to understand where he's going. And then he kindly sent me 5 papers, which I've gone through to try to understand where he is on the origin of life and what he's trying to do. And then I'd love to be able to discuss with him the things that he's trying to address and give my critique on it.
Well, let's start just maybe with one of them. Let's say, tell us what you understood to be the basic thesis of Lee, and just this will obviously have to be a sketch, but just generally where you find it problematic ultimately.
Yeah, I find it problematic in that there's an extrapolation from a very small experiment in a laboratory. There's an extrapolation to giving people an idea that we really understand more than we do. And what I appreciate about Lee is that he said he's a scientist and he likes to have discussions where he can, and he says, and I like to have discussions where I can have arguments about evidence, unquote. That's what he said. I'm all for that. So Justin, you then said that you, in GCSE biology, which I had to look up because I didn't know what GCSE is. And I figured, I found out that that's sort of like equivalent to our high school.
Yeah.
You said there was some kind, quote, there was some kind of primordial soup billions of years ago on the surface of the earth, chemicals swimming around, maybe bolts of lightning going off, and somehow something happened and poof, you got your first sort of very simple cell or something swimming around in the ocean. And then you asked Lee, am I right? And Lee said, you asked Lee, you said, is this view essentially correct or fundamentally wrong, unquote. And Lee said, you're not wrong. Your GCSE chemistry is not too bad at all. And I'm like, what? Where is the evidence for this? Here's a man who just said that he likes to discuss evidence. You tell him that there's a primordial soup and somehow things sort of got going and that's how life formed. And you ask Lee, is that right? And Lee, being the authority on origin of life, says, you're not wrong, quote, you're not wrong. Your GCS chemistry is not too bad at all, unquote. And I'm like, this is the type of extrapolation that I'm talking about from one of the premier people in the world in origin of life. And I'm saying, okay, you got evidence for me? Help me. Give me the evidence for that, Lee. Give me the evidence. I'd love to have it.
There's plenty of it. So, okay, well, let's just take a step back. So it's clear that chemicals on Earth before life were simpler because there was no machinery to make chemicals. The debate that I think you're digging into a debate that origin of life people have that I was giving Justin a GCSE, not a degree in chemistry, and that I don't care whether the atmosphere is oxidizing or reducing. We simply don't know. We can look at the fossil record, geological record, so on and so forth, and ask those questions. However, from meteorites that we have from the solar system, from where the birth of the solar system is, we know what type of chemicals are present. And basically, when you look at, say, Murchison or other meteorites, carbonaceous chondrites, we find very simple organic molecules with some nitrogen and oxygen, some carbon, some hydrogen, maybe a bit of sulfur, the elements that we'd expect we find on Earth, very simple versions. So all I was saying was that. Now, I think that, Jim, you've got to be careful here because you are trying to build a narrative. And building narratives in what I'm not interested in. His GCSE chemistry was fine. GCSE high school chemistry. Was there simple chemistry on Earth? Was there some energy on Earth? All those things. To the best of our knowledge, yes, there was energy. There was a lot of things going on. There's a great deal of evidence for the late heavy bombardment and all that stuff. But if you want concrete evidence, you can get meteors that are 4.7 billion years old, which have simple chemistry on them. And I think the thing that you're maybe creating a straw man here, because I think we basically agree that in the past, chemistry looks to have been simpler. We have seen no evidence of complex chemistry emerging before life on Earth. And complex, I would say, large molecules that you can hold in your hand, maybe that you can manufacture in your lab. And there is good evidence for that. There's plenty of peer-reviewed publications which talk about that information. Now, it doesn't suggest there is not evidence for what the lifetime is of erasure and the half-life of that complexity. However, we are beginning through very radioactive carbon dating, heavy atom carbon dating, and looking at the entropy of material, the disorder of the material, to kind of piece together if there was something complex there. But that is a very, very hard problem. So I disagree with you that Justin's chemistry is just fine. I don't know what the precise nature of that is, and maybe what you're getting at is some origin of life people says, look, it was reducing, then it was oxidizing, then there was phosphorus, and then there was sugar, and there was RNA. No, I would agree with you, there is no evidence about what sequence of small molecules were there, but was there a super simple molecules there on Earth at the beginning? Yes. And we can trace it back to the Big Bang, where we have proof that there was a Big Bang, and then we have stars forming, and those stars explode, and when those stars explode, they produce elements in their elemental form, and when they accrete on a planet, they then gain complexity.
Okay, yes, feel free to respond there, Jim.
Okay, so Lee, that's not what you said, and that's not what you put forward. I agree, we have small molecules that might be oxidizing.
No, I did not say anything else. That's exactly what I said. Justin said, was there a prebiotic soup? And I said, yes, the evidence says so.
No, and Justin said, then cells came forth, life came forth from that. All right, so
that is indeed
you were a little bit, let's get more specific. But what I'm saying is, you are the authority here. When you tell him, he asked you specifically, he says there was a primordial soup and life came forth, and your very simple cells came forth from this. We have no evidence how this thing happened. Lots of small molecules, cells are pretty complex.
We don't know how it happened, but the evidence on Earth says, in the fossil record, that life appeared very, very quickly, okay, after the late heavy bombardment. So that is evidence in the fossil record. That is not disputable. I think we both agree, planet Earth formed, rocks, simple chemistry, no life. Right? We don't know all the details of that, but then within a few 100 million years, there's evidence in the fossil record that life formed simple cellular life. Those two facts are not, as far as I know, disputed by
those are not contestable. how we got from the point A to point B?
Absolutely, but I did not say we knew.
Right.
That was the
So
entire point.
we're agreeing.
Okay.
So we keep you and I.
Yeah, Tor's going to go on to explain how it's just been greatly exaggerated.
So
Autocatalysis and other experiments.
there was a lot there. What do you disagree with what Lee said?
No, nothing. Go on. That's fine. I want to get on to what Tor's going to say.
You don't disagree with anything Lee said during that clip?
Simple molecules and chemicals being on the early Earth? Sure, you can have everything you want, but what Tor's going to say next is going to...
All right, well, this was one of the clips
But
I
I want-
wanted to bring up, and this is what proves that you do not agree with James Tor.
Yeah, I do agree with James Tor. Yeah.
No, you don't. So at about 22 minutes, 40 seconds...
Snake, don't tell me what I agree or disagree with. I am
will.
in full agreement with James Tor.
No, you're not.
He's about to
Let me
actually
quote it.
address...
No, you're not. Let me quote it.
Dude,
Lee
you
Cronin
are.
says. So Lee Cronin says, Earth formed, rocks, simple chemistry, no life. Right. We don't know all the details of that, but then within a few
Right.
100 million years, there's evidence in the fossil record that formed simple cellular life. Those two are facts. Those two facts are not, as far as I know, disputed by science. And James says those are not contestable.
Let's hear what he has to go on to say.
So you don't agree. So you agree that with the old Earth and that life formed on Earth.
I'm not here to debate the age of the Earth with you. This is the simple chemistry that would have been available on the early Earth.
Yeah, we're not debating it. We're debating whether you agree.
Right. No, I want to hear what Tor has to say right now.
Yeah, and the rest of the clip is also very telling.
It's not in your favor, Snake.
Neither
go
is
on,
it in yours.
Alex. No, we're not making advancements with
How we got
origin
from
of
simple
life.
molecules to life. It happened, but we don't know how. Okay,
Exactly.
so now I'm trying to understand what you were teaching us here. You said there's nothing magical about the emergence of life. It's really simple. That's what you said. And so I looked up, because I'm not a biologist. So I looked up what are the characteristics of life. So I just Googled it. What are the characteristics of life? It's responsive to the environment, growth and change, ability to reproduce, have a metabolism and breathe, maintain homeostasis, which I can give you a definition for that if you need it. Being made of cells and passing traits on to offspring. Now, we may or may not agree on that definition. That is a textbook definition of the characteristics of life. And you said that if you have information, you have life. You said, quote, universes without life are universes without information. So I just want to understand you. I'm asking you a question. Information itself is not life. Would you agree with that? Life has information, but information itself is not life. I can have a piece of paper and write on that piece of paper. That piece of paper bears information, but that piece of paper does not have life.
No. So that information on the paper is as much alive as you are, actually. But let me frame that properly, because I think, again, we're going to end up, I think most of our argument today may be semantic. If you did not exist, you would not be able to write on that piece of paper. So if someone brings to me a piece of paper with words on it, that just tells me that's evidence of life somewhere. The problem we have with life and the origin of life and definitions, we don't actually know what life is. And that's a problem. So that's why I made that very well thought out statement that universes without life that can't have information, because there's no syntactic information. There's no encoder and no decoder. Universes without life, of course, have the laws of physics in them and the laws of chemistry. But I'm really interested in that transition to a agency or a decision-making entity, like how many chemicals do you need in a pot? And we've begun to see in my laboratory how that can be steered. And I think that's counter all the debate, counter what you're saying is possible, counter what the origin of life says is possible. But we're just doing experiments to ask those questions. But so I would say, the piece of paper you write on isn't alive, it's not metabolizing, not in your definition, but you put that there. Therefore, if I found that piece of paper on another planet and I was able to discount that from background entropy, I would know that a living thing had put it there. And that's all I can do right now. I know so little about what life is. I'm able to understand. I think I kind of view myself a bit like before Isaac Newton wrote down how gravity worked. I know that gravity exists, I can see it, but I don't yet have the equation for it. And isn't it interesting that, it took Newton and then Einstein to quantify the law of gravity, and then obviously people can then apply that everywhere in the universe, but we knew it existed. And I'm kind of excited because we're doing this like pre-quantum mechanics world for biology, pre-understanding the equations, the physical laws that give rise to biology. But confident I am that we'll find them. And I can give you many reasons for that, but confidence is nothing without evidence. And what we have to discuss today is the evidence trail that's leading me down this track. Obviously, it's not finished yet. I haven't made life in my lab yet. I will. The argument will be that life that I made in the lab, did it just come from me? And where did I come from? And so what we have to work really hard to do is not obsess about the origin of life, but how can we create complex chemistry from simple chemistry? And what are the laws that turn that complex chemistry? And one comment I'll say is like in nanomachines, we're never ever going to make nanomachines deterministically. We have to evolve them. The cell is a good example of that. And even today, with all this work in nanotechnology, Jim, that you work in, there is not one functioning nanomachine in our technology made from the chemist up. It's all from the electrical engineer down.
Well, look, I'm just going to go to a quick break and we'll return.
Do you have any problems with that? Are we still on?
Yeah. I'm waiting for him to actually answer. This is where he gets into some of the chemistry problems.
What am I supposed to answer? What do you want me to talk about?
You can comment on Tor as he continues, I guess. Whatever you want, man.
Okay. Well, continue, I guess. There's some... We might have to go back because there's a few quotes that I want to talk about that happened earlier. So go on, I guess.
No, you want to tap dance. You don't have any real evidence for abiogenesis, but go ahead.
There's plenty of evidence. There's no demonstration of it.
Wow.
Yeah, no one claims that the entire problem is solved.
It's nowhere close either.
It depends on what you mean by
Yeah,
close.
right. Yeah, okay. Go on, Matt.
We know a lot about it. There's a lot we don't know. How close we are, we don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, Snake, do you have a timestamp you want to go to, or should we just continue?
Are we just going to go through mostly the whole thing?
No, we'll go through the next 5 minutes or so because Tor gets into some specific things, autocatalysis and how all this stuff has been greatly exaggerated, all the research and experiments. It's not leading to anything.
Yeah, let's just go on then.
With Jim responding. Fascinating discussion. So glad I'm able to bring both Lee and Jim together for today's conversation on the origins of life. It's a part two, really, to the conversation that Lee took part in at the end. It is not founded on the same origins of life. This was following a session we did on this with Lee as one of the guests last year on Unbelievable, current origins of life research and whether it really is. The theories are behind this, what we're seeing happen in the laboratory. Yeah, what are your responses here to all of this, Jim?
Right. So Lee said that we may come down to a matter of semantics in our discussion. I don't disagree with that. Let me just say also upfront, the reason I have never supported intelligent design, although I'm sympathetic to the arguments, is the first line on my website under the evolution creation page. I don't support intelligent design because I have no tool to measure it. I have not a tool to measure that something has been intelligently designed. So I hold my colleagues to the same tool.
Do you agree with that?
that I may have to hold myself. That's why I don't support, because I have not a tool to measure it. I'm not against it. I just have not a tool to measure it. Secondly, I've never said that this cannot happen by naturalistic explanation. In fact, I've gone on to say is I have no idea what we're going to discover in 50 years, 100 years, 300 years from now. If 150 years ago you asked somebody where's information stored in the cell, they would have said, I have no idea. It must be God. No, well, we understand that the information is stored in the cell and the DNA. So we learn things with time. And that's what I'm saying. As of now, there's many things that we just don't understand. So to project as if we understand them, and to project as if we understand them, whether we're speaking about high school students or professors, is wrong. We just have to say, this is an open discussion. We can't address this. Now, as far as information that Lee was talking about, that life has information, and
can you pause it?
Find a piece of paper written on it, you know that life was there. I agree. But life has...
So do you agree with him that we might learn something new about it?
Yeah, but I personally think it's...
Is he saying that we'll never figure it out?
He's emailed me and said that personally, yes, and I can bring up that email. In the debate, he leaves it open. You want me to bring up that email and post it?
Okay, so why is he speaking out of both sides of his mouth?
Well, because the chemistry is not making any advancements, and he was being very generous to Lee Cronin, and I have the email of that if you want me to post that.
It objectively is making advancements.
No, it really isn't.
It really is.
With what? Protocells that are dead coffins?
Every time they publish something new about it, that's making advancements.
No, they can publish all kinds of things. That doesn't mean it's making progress.
It literally does. If
You're
you know more
delusional,
about
dude.
it, then you're making progress.
No, they publish papers on all kinds of... They still publish papers on the Miller experiment from 52.
Okay, so if we learn more about it, then we're making progress.
It's a total failure. I know you're stubborn and dense and totally delusional, and you don't really want to understand that, but it's not making progress. But go ahead, Maddox.
Well, every time we learn something new, it's progress. I know you're stubborn and dense and don't want to understand that.
Wow.
It's information. Life has matter. We have to deal with both of these. We have to deal
I'm
with
the
information
child.
and we have to deal with matter. Matter is
What
a
a
huge
fucking
problem.
joke.
99% of what I talk about in my papers is the matter. I might have a paragraph on information. Lee says, my biggest problem is I don't understand information. That's what he said in the last thing. And I will confess, I am not I'm not an aficionado of informatics. That I am not. You had Perry Marshall on there. He is. I don't deal with information. Most of my argument has to do with the matter. In order to have life, you have to have the matter around life. It is not merely information. And so Lee has said biology, all that biology is chemistry with history. And I look at this and I'm thinking, well, biology is really complex. Biology has chemistry with history, but it is not chemistry with history. It is enormously more than just chemistry with history. It's extremely complex. And what I feel that Lee is doing is that he is putting out a definition of life that would allow him to try to get at, say, this Evolution 2.0 prize. But it's not a definition of life that any biologist would look at this and say
wow,
this is life.
exactly.
And maybe I'm wrong, and Lee can correct me on this. But biology is the science of life and living organisms. An organism is a living entity consisting of one cell, for example, bacteria, or several cells, for example, animals, plant, fungi. That's what biology is, and that definition that I just said is
You
something.
pause that right there. Yeah, I wanted to actually discuss.
You gotta have a cell in order to have life. You just want to say that I have a.
Can you pause that, Maddox? Sai in the chat. Sai just brought up a. Can you bring up Sai's comment? Because I talk about show stack every now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think is Sai. What is he? PhD biochemist? Sai.
Not sure.
Yeah. Maddox, he's a biochemist. Is Sai?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Yes, Dr. Gart is a PhD biochemist. He was a tenured professor at Rutgers and oh man, I apologize. I believe his other university was University of New York, maybe. I don't know. I know he was tenured at Rutgers and one other university. Yes.
Yeah. Well,
and he's
okay,
he's also currently the editor of a biochemistry publication as well.
Right. Okay. Well, I was just saying, yeah, a lot of papers get I mean, just because there's a paper being published doesn't mean there's evidence. And a lot of papers, like he's just stating right there, get retracted because the chemistry doesn't work.
So what's your point, that will all be retracted, or what?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what your point is.
What is your point other than hypothetical bullshit that's gone nowhere in 75 years?
It's gone lots of places. I don't know why you think it's going nowhere. We're learning more about it.
And it's not making progress.
And we're learning more about what we don't know about it.
And actually you just heard a biochemist say that a paper was retracted because
I'm aware that papers are retracted, and I'm aware that
plenty are, yeah. Jack Shostak.
What's your point?
Plenty You don't see that as...
Oh, well, okay, so I didn't really... Okay,
wow.
So he was tenured at NYU, Pittsburgh, I guess he was also at the NIH and Rutgers. So, yes, he is a... and then as Sal says, a very senior biochemist. Many, many honors.
So what's your point? Because one person made a mistake on their paper, that therefore there's no progress? Is that your point?
I would assume the point. I would assume the point that Dr. Gart is making is that it was a rather heavily relied upon premise for abiogenesis research, which has had to be retracted, and there are many other facets of supposed steps that are being taken that were based on that as a foundation, which has now been retracted, which means it's ripping the rug out from underneath some of the most relied upon talking points, shall we say.
Right. So just when they think there's 10 steps forward, there's immediately, 10 steps back.
Yeah, even in science, if you figure out you can't do something, that's progress towards figuring out what's left for you to study.
No, that's not. And in fact, right now there's a $10 million. No. We could. You know what? Maybe we should play the Perry Marshall video with the information, because right now there's a $10 million prize for anyone that can produce code through unguided natural chemistry, and nobody can do it.
I think what Dr. Gart just said there is answers the whole point of why it's significant.
Yeah, exactly right. That's exactly what I said. Taking steps backwards. Exactly. Yeah, I agree. Side. Great point, brother.
You could see it as a step backward, or you could see it as learning that what we need to look into. Knowing that this experiment doesn't work is progress in trying to figure out which experiments do work.
No, Snake. If something was a failure, it's always a failure. That's not an advancement. So you can live in your fantasy world, but no, that's not making an advancement. That's a step backwards. Exactly what I just said, and a biochemist even agreed with me.
Yeah, it's both.
Wow.
So it's a step backwards for that area of research, and
that's a major scenario. No, that's a major scenario. The RNA world has been around, I think, since 1986, and it's not making progress. Sai, can you correct me on that? How long has the RNA world been around? I think it was Walter. Was it Walter Gilbert in 1986? That's how long RNA world has been around, and it's been plagued with problems for decades. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sai.
So back in like Miller-Urey days, they thought that they could just throw it into the jars and
you're lost, dude. Just be quiet, dude. You're a joke.
No. So the more that you know, the more you learn that you don't know about a topic. The more things you know that you have to look into.
If something has been
if you know that I'm not done talking. If you know that a certain type
was
of
retracted, how did it advance?
I'm not done talking.
If
you know,
because you're brainless. Tony, let's Snake finish this point. Go ahead.
If you know that a certain type of aircraft does not work, you're making progress towards certain aircraft that do work. You know that's not the way we're going.
By chance, can any aircraft, even as let's say a failed aircraft, the first airplane that didn't even get off the ground, did that happen by chance at all, or was it the result of design engineering?
Oh my God, dude.
Yeah, oh my God is right.
You think that because we engineer things that therefore everything has to be engineered?
The cell, Can you explain abiogenesis in any way whatsoever, other than hypothetical?
That's the point. That's why we're studying it.
And it's not making progress.
Okay, hang on, guys. Okay, so let's toss in. I'm going to toss in another different point here. Okay, so if the Shostak papers had to be withdrawn and RNA replication is no longer supported, then you are now back to being stuck with a requirement for coevolution of both proteins and RNA simultaneously. Like, otherwise you have no replication method. So
by his method, that doesn't mean that it can't exist. It means that what he proposed doesn't work.
Yeah, it's abiogenesis is always going to be possible. Maybe aliens, maybe some other planet.
So are you suggesting that if it is now not plausible from a chemistry perspective for the RNA self-replication to work and actually happen from a chemistry perspective, you now are forced to be reliant upon external separate agency, in this context enzymes, to do this? Are you suggesting that that's not a requirement of coevolution?
That intelligence is not a requirement?
No, that you wouldn't require coevolution of both the RNA and the proteins that would be needed to enable the transcription.
I'm saying that you can't conclude that from the fact that one paper was rescinded.
Okay, but that was like the only thing they had to even make the RNA world remotely.
Yeah, but just because one method fails doesn't mean that it's impossible to do.
Okay, so they've been eliminating all the other feasible options. That was the only one they came up with that seemed even remotely plausible.
Yeah, that was a major one by an origin of life researcher.
Like, nope, not even a possibility. Like, let's not go down this rabbit hole.
That's a major problem when you're trying to prove a negative. It's very difficult because you can't conclude that because this didn't work that it can't be done at all by any method.
Yeah, it happened in some other on another planet. Yeah, it happened in some other universe. I know, somewhere under a rock on another planet. We just can't show it today or in a lab.
Yeah, and you can't conclude that therefore it can't be done.
Yep. Yeah, and it still happens somewhere. We know the narrative. Did Cy respond to that, Maddox, about the RNA world?
He said something about that he never liked. He said yes, you were correct, but he also.
Okay. He did say I was correct. Okay.
Let's see if I can find that. And he said something about he never liked it. He said you are not wrong. I never liked RNA World myself.
Right. But they're still working on it. It happened in some environment. They'll find it one day. Maybe, I don't know, 20,000 years. Who knows?
Well, I mean, for me personally, the annealing problem is just the
nucleotide problem. RNA is highly unstable. There's dozens of problems.
It's the KO. In my opinion, the annealing problem is the KO punch, but that's
Yeah, so if you know what the problems are, you have to research. That's making progress in what you need to research.
And it's not. Yeah, and it's not, but you can believe that all you want, Snake.
So has there been progress since Miller?
Okay, guys, hang on. So, Snake, do you have a particular spot in the Cronin Tour discussion that you want to go to, or like Chase press play? What would you guys like to do? Let's continue.
Oh, there was another 5 minutes. I don't know if he talked about autocatalysis and some of the problems. I think it was coming up in the next 4 minutes.
Okay.
System, that itself is not life.
And just before Lee comes in, from what I understood, and again, Lee can correct this, but what Lee has achieved in his lab in terms of what he's witnessed in terms of these replicating, I think it's salt molybdenum crystals or whatever, for you, what he sees as the beginnings of an explanation of how life arose and how a complex system could ultimately emerge, you believe simply are nowhere near, presumably, what actually constitutes life, and therefore Lee shouldn't be talking about it in terms of being some sort of approach to the origin of life.
Well, I know Lee is bursting to comment, but you just asked me a question, so let me answer that question. I wanted so much to understand from Lee what he was talking about. I listened very carefully on the last broadcast, and he talked about salad dressing and life. He said life formed in bubbles, and these bubbles are like salad dressing. They get stuck, something gets stuck, and then all of a sudden he starts to talk about flipping coins. I was trying to track with him. And then when he said there's a paper on this, and he was kind enough to send me this paper, I, with great enthusiasm, went to that paper with great enthusiasm because I wanted to see. And, I feel like I was told this is going to be the greatest show on earth. And I went in there and there was an old poodle standing on his hind legs. I mean, there was nothing. This is just an autocatalytic reaction. You're forming some clusters and other clusters can use those as templates to form around them. Autocatalytic reactions have been around a long time in chemistry for over 100 years. Oswald came up with these over 100 years ago. I don't see how that is giving you information of life. The day his student walks in that laboratory, by walking into that laboratory, he's influenced that experiment. By choosing a chemical off the shelf, he's influenced that experiment. And then all he set up was an autocatalytic reaction. I think that there's nothing there. There's nothing there that points me toward anything of life that any biologist looking toward what is defined as life, not by Lee's definition, but by anyone else's definition, where you have to have, example, one cell, like a bacterium, anything like that, anything close. It's not even close to that. Okay. And so I think it's been totally overblown.
Okay, Lee,
strong criticism. Total agreement. I'll stop it there.
It's like, look, I really respect.
They have to basically. Right. Yeah, and you're making a narrative too. But basically, they have to redefine what life is, and that's all they're doing. And in fact, Lee Cronin is not even trying to produce organic life at this point. He's trying to create some sort of synthetic inorganic cells because the problems are so severe.
He's trying to understand what the nature of life is and trying to figure out how,
because he can't produce
how
life.
Information can be created by autocatalytic.
No.
Yeah, he literally just explained that.
Actually, as of this year, he's currently stepped away from attempting to replicate carbon-based life, and he's focused on silicon-based life.
Yeah.
So he's actually not even researching producing life as we know it.
Yep. Not even close.
So if he could produce some sort of silicon-based life form, is that progress?
Well, I mean, there's so many issues with he's not going to, but it's recognized.
Well, I don't know how you can make claims about the future, but
let's ask Cy.
Yeah. Now, the reason for that is that silicon doesn't have enough of the variable possibilities that carbon does that are required for life as we know it to come into being. So even if you're able to pull off something which it doesn't actually have enough of the capacity that's required for life to be able to do it, that's a whole other problem. You're not actually, it's like, okay, so you're going to play with Play-Doh versus creating a sculpture out of clay. Like, that's what we're talking about here.
So if you can prove that this set of chemical reactions can produce information, self-replicating information, that's not
there we go.
Progress in understanding life.
Okay, so the PhD in the
there you go.
Silicon is a blind alley.
Yeah.
And Dr. Fuzzarana had a whole.
Yeah.
Dr. Pozzarana and I had a whole conversation about this, and he went on a 10-minute expose about why that's a stupid problem. How it was one of the things they discussed when he was getting his PhD. Of like, this is ridiculous. This could never work. Irony of ironies. Fast forward to today, and Lee Cronin's trying to figure out a way to make silicone life.
I just say Snake makes life. He gets to 10 million. He's probably smarter than Lee Cronin, Sygart, Tor, all these guys.
Yeah, so I'm going to repeat my question. It's not making progress in understanding life if you understand how you can create information naturally?
They're not able to. Nowhere close.
That's not what I asked, is it?
All the scenarios have failed.
That's not what I asked, is it?
They're not learning.
That's not what I asked, is it?
You didn't ask me anything. I'm
Would you like
commenting
me to
on your
repeat
statement.
the question?
Don't tap dance, dude. You have no evidence. You're just making
You
yourself
say
look
as
like
you're
an
tap
idiot.
dancing, as you're avoiding the question.
There is no question.
This
They're
is
not
why you're a
making
joke.
progress. They're not making progress. They're not learning. They're
They are.
failing. No, they're failing.
No, you can say that all day, except
And
they
you
keep
can say
learning
that
new
they're
things
making
about it.
progress all day. And you can say what
Yeah,
you
and
want
I
to
can
say.
actually point to papers that are published every year. So
And that are showing what? Nothing. Hypothesis, bullshit that hasn't
it
gone
depends
anywhere.
on the paper.
Yeah.
They
okay.
show lots
in
of different
Fantasyland.
things.
Yeah.
You want me to summarize everything that they've published in 2020?
A major researcher just retracted his paper. We had
So
a
what?
biochemist tonight. Just say that.
So what?
So what?
That doesn't
yeah,
mean
everything's
that
so
all,
what
that
to you.
doesn't mean that
Right,
every
right,
single.
okay.
So because someone retracted one paper, that means we haven't made progress in 50 years?
There's plenty of papers that haven't gone anywhere. Let's talk about Craig Venter for a minute. He's another researcher. Are you aware of what he's done?
Yeah.
He claimed he created artificial life in the lab. He came nowhere close. In fact, he had to copy a genome and use lots of pre-existing parts.
Well, I think that's because of misunderstanding, misinformation from the media who are reporting on it.
No. He actually came out and said that. He has a YouTube video on that. It's about 10 years old. He actually came out and said he created life in the lab.
Well, he did synthesize the DNA, although it was templated from existing DNA.
Right.
And he
Started with a template, pre-existing enzymes, pre-existing genome, pre-existing cell membrane. Yeah. Go on, Maddox, because there's nothing being presented here.
Great point from Salvador. Point to a paper that will not be rendered moot by the asphalt paradox.
Exactly.
If not, those papers are worthless.
Why do you keep saying they're worthless if they're actually demonstrating something?
Yeah, we got Fantasyland here tonight.
You can't explain it, can you? You're just laughing. Explain it.
They're not you want to bring Sal and Cy in, Maddox? I mean, I'm not a PhD biochemist. Neither is Snake. Do you want to bring these people in?
Well, we'll continue this. Sal and Cy, if you guys would like to join, let me know. I'll shoot y'all links to come in. Just let me know if you want to. You're welcome to. All right, let's continue.
So you're not going to explain it. Cool.
I didn't really expect him to kind of be so, I would say, I don't know. Anyway, look, let me address the first point. The right stuff is not enough, right? If I take a cell and grind it into atoms, I get chemicals out. So, of course, information in the cell is how you get biology. The thing that I am perhaps a bit more humble than Jim thinks he knows what biology is. Well, I don't. That's why I'm doing experiments. So biology isn't necessarily defined by a cell. Biology isn't necessarily defined by that. All I know is that if I take a cell and I grind it up, I get atoms out. So reductionistically, I put in my atom grinder. Now, Jim is choosing to not understand my argument because I now know he's making a narrative. The people make narratives from an ideological point of view. I'm not going to go there, the ideology. I'm just going to give you the evidence, the experiments, and then the listeners and the viewers can judge. What I showed to Jim was, he's right, that autocatalysis has been around for hundreds of years. So what Jim is talking about is the way that basically things can self-promote. But they have no information in them. And he talked about a thing called Ostwald ripening, which the listeners that are listening might want to look that up. And Ostwald ripening is a macroscopic technique where there's no information. The paper I showed Jim, and actually on the archive, shows that molecular information that is a template like the DNA does with itself, can basically template at the molecular level one structure that's impossible to form without that template. So it's almost like you're able to put a template into an archway, like a Roman archway, put in a key, and then on that template you can build another one, and there's a hierarchy of templates. And what we showed is you can make what's called an autocatalytic set. And the word set is really important. There's no example outside of biology of a catalyst that makes a catalyst that makes a catalyst that makes a catalyst. They work together. Maybe Jim is jealous because he wants to do it using nano stuff, but no one's managed to engineer it. We managed to discover one by scratch by searching. And yes, I would agree with Jim. We went and got pure molybdenate off the shelf. A human being did that deterministically. And we have to account, honestly, for the information that we put into the material, into the experiment. And that's a valid comment. It's not a criticism. It's an assumption you have to make. Now, I think that Jim is saying it's impossible to know what gives rise to biology because it's complicated. And I'm just saying that's a fairly poor argument. And we should say, let's agree on our assumptions. We both assume that chemistry, that the origin of life was simpler than it was today. That's an assumption that we tested. I'm happy to write all my assumptions and test them at every stage. That's what a good scientist does. First assumption, no life. Second assumption, simple chemistry. Third assumption, a little bit of time. Fourth assumption, bit of energy. And then fifth assumption, some kind of selection in the environment, some kind of persistence. What is that? And I try to help the listener understand. And I was aware that not everyone is a professor of nanoscience. So I put it in terms that I think the listener could get some kind of analogy, metaphor out of. And Jim is kind of lambasting me for not having the correct term. He's already admitted he's not going to understand mathematics, so I write it down. So the point is that we are talking about only one point of biology on Earth. We don't know what biology is. So it's ridiculous to kind of say, I'm going to make biology. I'm actually, if anything, an inorganic biologist or maybe an astrobiologist. I have made, to counter Jim's argument, a detection system that's going to allow us to distinguish alien life from non-alien life on other worlds and also use that in the laboratory. And I'll give Jim a working assay for biology or not, which you can try and attack, which is if I have a system, a magic black box, and let's say in that black box, there could be a living cell, or there could be some random chemistry. I'm not allowed to know what. The only way I can tell when I get stuff out of that box is by looking at the complexity of the molecule. And we've done some good mathematics and some good arguments. And I've sent Jim that other paper, but maybe he's going to tell me that's all nonsense as well, that explains when you use a pair of scissors, if you cut up the molecules, whether that has been generated in a genetic system or an informational system, because genetics is a strong word, or not. So we have developed a test for finding chemistry that's becoming more complex. We're then developing a model to go and search for that. And now we're then instantiating that in the lab with good experimental assumptions. And we're going to go back and say, is that valid? Is that valid? What we're not doing, which I hope Jim will give some credit for, is saying it's RNA, it's sugars, it's this, it's this, it's this. We're saying, no, we have no idea what the pathway to life was, but we know that living systems create complex artifacts, be them molecules, proteins, ribosomes, or the works of Shakespeare. So let's use those as a encoding for a experiment. And that's the falsifiable thing that we're doing. Because the origin of life isn't even a falsifiable question. I can't even go back. No. I don't know what happened, I never will. In fact, I actually don't care what happened at the origin of life. What I care about is if I can create a life form in the lab now with minimal interaction with it. Or even better, can I see a life form naturally emerging on another planet as an observer? That would be a dream.
Okay. That would, wouldn't it? Okay.
It's just a lot of high hopes for creating life in the lab, but Thor addresses all that.
Yeah, so we should just not look into it. We should just quit because you think it's impossible.
No, keep doing it. I hope they do it. They're not ever going to come close, though. That's my prediction. But go on.
Here's the question I would have: is there there's nothing to say you shouldn't try and figure out what are the fundamental requirements for life. It's just a question of, are you doing it from the perspective of it would require an intelligent agent, therefore let's figure out what the processes would be.
Right.
And what would have to happen, versus can this happen through totally undirected process and just through chance?
Yeah.
I mean, that's...
Yeah, so not even James
the dichotomy.
will assert that God did it. He literally says this.
In his scientific papers, he doesn't defend intelligent design.
He said at minute 7 and 47 seconds, I've never brought God into any of my arguments on the origin of life. I use purely naturalistic explanations for what I have to say about the evidence. I only critique the evidence of others. I never bring God into this. But you disagree with that, Tony. You bring God into this.
Are you aware he's a Christian?
Yeah. He doesn't bring that into these arguments, though.
Right, but he does believe that there's an...
Is it relevant when you played that clip about him saying that he loves Jesus? Because it's not relevant.
Okay, well, that is his personal belief, but he does believe that there is an intelligent agent behind the entire universe and life. And I have an email that can... Yeah, I can pull that up. Do you want the email?
If I believed in a God, then I would believe in a God who made a universe that was capable of naturalistically producing life, because that would be a greater God inherently.
Right, but James Tour does not accept abiogenesis.
Hold on. Let's rewind for a second. You just stated that, and I would say this is an opinion, that it would require a greater God to create something where it would just come naturally versus doing it directly. Is that what you just said?
Yeah, along the lines of kind of an ontological argument that the greatest possible being is the God, essentially.
Right, but why does that God being doing it from where I don't have my hands in the equation at all, versus other than from a original perspective, and I put my hand was in the equation in terms of the way I created everything from the first place, or I do it in a direct action inside of the universe. Like, I'm not really sure how that has any bearing on whether or not it's the ultimate being.
Okay, is a car a greater car if it can drive itself, or if you have to intervene in every action?
How is God intervening in every action?
So, at least as far as life is concerned.
Okay, for the
So if
self-driving, does the self-driving car require an intelligent agent to build it in the first place?
Yeah, we're talking about
Okay, so
two
then what the heck
instances
is your,
of
so
an
what's your
intelligent.
point?
We're talking about two instances of an intelligent designer designing two different things. So one is an intelligent designer who is able to design at such a high level that that his creation is able to create all these other creations that this lesser God has to step in and do inside of the creation one by one. And how would that God do it? Is he moving every single molecule? Is he moving every single molecule individually? What is his lab?
You have literally just made the subjective, taking your subjective opinion.
It's not. It's more highly complex.
No.
Yeah, it is.
No, it is not.
It objectively is more highly complex. A universe that can create life and creations by itself, or a universe that just sits there and doesn't create life unless a God intervenes. Which is more complex?
It is based on your subjective opinion. No. Because the requirements that we're looking at would require, what the whole point that's being made is that you would have to bend or have different rules in order for these things to take place. That's the entire point that's being made. So you're not talking about a comparable universe at all. It seems that's what's going over your head.
We're talking about two different universes. One where the design is so much more highly complex and finely designed and finely tuned.
I'm not going to address this because this is again.
So you're going to cut me off.
No, I'm just saying that that's just completely subjective opinion.
It's not. It's taking in objective facts. The universe is more highly tuned if it can do things that the other universe cannot.
Okay, you do realize the entire point of
more capable.
Okay, the entire point of that life is more complex. That our current form of life is so complex that it requires the direct interaction. That is the entire point.
Yeah, and that's a fallacy.
That means that the one that can do it without the requirement means that the life itself would be simpler. You're literally contradicting the entire premise.
No.
Anyway, let's continue.
So God,
I'm not here to debate you on this.
You're
one.
saying God couldn't design a universe.
I'm not saying that God couldn't do. That's not the point. I'm countermanding the point you're making about it being God being inferior on which path he goes.
You're throwing out a response and then changing the subject. So
no, I've literally addressed your point twice now, and you're not getting it. So let's move on.
Yeah, and your point is moot because
you don't even know what you're talking
about. Your whole argument is.
So you just want to throw out an argument and then move on, so I can't.
You're making blanket assertions that somehow that means that God would have to be either greater or inferior, depending on which path they went, and that is.
I was trying to get into
itself in so many times, but let's go back to the original subject of tonight.
I was trying to get into specifics, but you just wanted to throw out a response and then cut me off. So yeah,
it's becoming a lot more practical right now. So he says that the reason he was saying things the way he was in the last podcast because he was lowering it to the explanation of the common.
Sorry, making it accessible and not
making it accessible.
Arguably.
Okay. So Lee, I did look at your other papers, and I have no problem with those. I think it's great if you can come up with a testing system to see what is life, and I think NASA would support such a system. because they're looking for life. What are the signs of life? I have no problem with those papers at all. In fact,
A lot
Is
of
the video
interference,
choppy
Maddox.
for you guys?
Yeah, we got choppy video here.
Intelligent design in the system, and I have no problem with that.
Maddox, is Sai still in the chat? I actually wanted to ask Sai a question, if he could respond. He's still in there.
Oh, I think you maybe go ahead and ask the question. What you said the video is coming through choppy?
Yeah.
Man, I wonder if my internet's getting ready to go out again. I'm plugged into my Ethernet, but
Yeah, I wanted to.
so by the way, for everybody who's unaware of this, so I live in Nashville. We had on Christmas morning, about 3.5 miles from my house, there was a stupid RV that blew up. In case you don't know, and it was actually directly in front of one of the biggest communication. The bomb went off right in front of one of the biggest communication hubs in the United States, and so internet and cell service has been completely taken out.
Okay, Sai's in the chat, and so is James.
Okay, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, what advancements have they been making in the last 10 years, and what are some of the most serious problems with some of the most current scenarios, such as the RNA world, metabolism first, and protocells, which are being passed off as close to life? If I can get an answer on that.
That would be interesting to see if Sai and Dr. James Carter is also in the room. He's also a PhD biochemist. It'd be interesting if you guys wouldn't mind putting like each one of y'all's like top 2 problems. That would be that'd be fantastic. Brady. Yeah, the RV gave a warning. It was bizarre. I don't know if you guys have seen the video, but there was literally a giant speaker telling people to evacuate the area that a bomb was about to go off, and even did countdown. And before it finally basically gave the cops time to go in, knock on people's doors, get people to start clearing out, and then detonated. It's kind of it was amazing. But yeah, so it's been weird. It's actually not getting as much national coverage as it should be, but it basically took out communication from northern Alabama up into southern Kentucky, over into part of Georgia, and like basically one of the main communication arteries goes from like Atlanta to Nashville, and then Nashville up to Chicago, and Nashville over to St. Louis, and so basically everything in the pathway of that and like the offshoots basically was jacked because they blew up a bunch of the main switches. The like 911 was taken out, like FirstNet hub. It's like a big first responder vendor. Like their stuff got blown up, and it was pretty much So I agree with you. It's just it's much too huge a question to respond for here. Respond in chat.
Well, there could be a short answer to that.
He says my top problem is the issue of very accurate self-replication, which is required in any kind of evolution to allow for life to improve. So and by the way, Sai has a fantastic discussion on this over on his channel, and where he discusses the fidelity problem. And I think it was on your channel. I remember watching it with you. I forget who you were talking with, on the fidelity problem, and how you need 99.999%. Otherwise, you have serious issues.
And also, I wanted to ask Sai, just because chemists are pumping out and publishing hundreds of papers every year on abiogenesis, that doesn't mean there's any real advancements or that there's anything working in these scenarios that have actually been failing for decades. That would be my follow-up to Sai.
There may not be advancement in that specific area you want advancement in.
I didn't ask you.
Yeah, and I don't care.
I don't care your opinion either.
I'll respond if I want to.
Good. I'm not even going to listen.
I know you don't. That's very typical.
You don't listen either. Yeah, very typical of you. Yeah, right back at you.
Oh.
Yeah, you want to play that game.
I thought that was being childish.
You are a child. You play with toys.
You repeated what I
Grown
said
man
back
that
to
plays
you,
with
which you
toys.
said was childish.
Yeah. This is what you do. This is when you Maddox. This is how you behave when you have no evidence.
Hang on. Dr. Carter says, I second Sai and would add molecular entropy. This is a good piece. Okay, so let's move on let's keep going, and then we've been going for a while on this, so let's keep going.
Them try to develop a model to look for intelligence. Again, I don't go there. I never use intelligent design as an argument in what I'm doing. I'm just critiquing the science. And the problem is, Lee, that a lot of the times that people hear these things, they hear people from the Origin of Life community say things, and they believe it. And the Origin of Life community may be saying, well, I was just trying to make that accessible to you, because when I ask them for details on it, the details seem to go away. I think he's got you.
I can call you out on that when the nanotechnology community say that they've made nano machines, and we say we've made these robots, they're going to fix you, and you've done this as well, and I've read some of your papers. And I would argue it's not, the Origin of Life community aren't seeking to be duplicitous. They're simply trying to get people excited about the possibilities. And what I'm trying to do is to take a middle road to say, look, you're in your nano work trying to get people excited about the possibilities for nanotechnology. That's brilliant. Let's make the extrapolation. Maybe we can give that accommodation to the Origin of Life. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, but is that a fair criticism that we all, in nanotechnology as well, you're making claims that may seem something in the public, but obviously need more working out in the laboratory?
Well, possibly. I mean, there's a company now started around the nanomachines to drill into these cells to affect the cells, we've demonstrated that through these nanomachines we can deliver antibiotics that were formerly outdated, that couldn't get through the bacterial membrane, and now they get in and they kill those bacteria beautifully. So we are showing that they are indeed working, and we've been working on this for all of just a couple of years with these cells, and already we're getting this to work. The problem with Origin of Life community is this is a hard target. So Lee has said all life is pretty boring if you think about it. Life is complex, is a complex chemical system that can persist over time, unquote. And so, Lee, I'm trying to just follow what you say. So in one sense, you say it's pretty boring, and in the same sentence, you say it's a complex chemical system. And I agree with you. It is a complex chemical system. It entails lots of complex molecules. The Origin of Life community is trying to make a complex molecule and another set of complex molecules. Most of the time, they make them racemic anyway. They never deal they rarely deal with the purification problem, and they won't take what they've made and bring it on to the next step. It's all relay synthesis over and over again.
Exactly.
It's very complex. It's hard to do, but Lee, as I understand your work, you're not trying to do what many other people are doing. You're not trying to make yet another way to make amino acids, another way to make a nucleotide, another way to try to hook. You're not doing that. You're trying to bring us back to the fundamentals of what is life, and can you begin to make something that's lifelike in your lab? And so I appreciate that. I didn't know anything about that, or that's why I've never critiqued your work in any of my writings, because it's new to me, and so that I understand better what you're doing now. So I'm not holding you to account for what these other people have written.
I mean, just before Lee comes back in, just because you obviously have responded to other people in the Origin of Life community, Jim, has your criticism been, you might want to sketch out some examples of people who you think are basically painting a sort of just so picture of how inorganic chemistry went to, a sort of RNA or whatever, and you just think that they're massively simplifying or brushing over the complexity that's involved in that process? I think you had a particular critique of an article that went in Nature. I'm afraid I forget the name of the person who wrote the article and so on. But you, as you say, Lee is doing something a bit different to those guys, but you've obviously had quite strong words for others in the community who are trying to make out that there is this naturalistic explanation that we're kind of pretty close to understanding.
Right. Yes. So when they take their little experiment in the lab and they extrapolate it and they bring it to life, it makes the layperson feel that we understand what's going on. That's not the case at all. And it's not just the layperson. Even my faculty colleagues have been confused by these things, and the extrapolations are way overboard. And I think Lee would agree with me a lot on this, as I've read his work. Lee's work is very different. I think, now getting back to Lee's work, I think it's oversimplified. I think that he's nowhere near life, but what he's trying to do, and I see this. He said this on the last broadcast. He said what we can't agree on what life is. He says there's no agreement among different people. He says, quote, what I've come up with is forgetting what life is, but looking at what life does, unquote. Quote again, what does life do that is different than, say, a non-living plant? Life makes things, unquote. Again, he says, quote, living systems tend to make stuff, and that is what we call life, and we are looking for it, unquote. And so I see what he's trying to, what Lee is doing. He is trying to step back, because I just read to you a Googled definition of what biology is. Biology says you've got to have a cell there. And Lee is stepping back from his mathematical background. He's stepping back. What I see is to something much more basic. Okay, does life have to be a cell, or can life come from something simpler, and then we move on toward this? And so what I feel that he's done, though, in doing this is he projects that what he's doing is he's making life. And now he's telling us, he's saying, yes, it's not life as we would understand it as a cell. It's doing things that life might do. Life tends to make things. Lots of chemistry makes things.
I think that's a very good point I can be very constructive on, if I may, Justin.
Please do.
Oh, great. You guys have everything you want to weigh in there?
Why don't you let him respond?
I mean, I'm not like silencing Lee Cronin. I was just putting me a pause if you guys had any response. If you don't, just say no, and I'll press play.
Yeah, I mean, he said he's not holding Lee accountable for most of the mistakes and redundancies of many of the scientists. That his work is different. I think that's great. I think that I agree with James Tour that there's a lot of misconceptions out there, and Lee does too. But that doesn't mean that, and it sounds like James is hopeful that we'll figure out more about the origin of life, because we're finding out that there are pseudo living things, like a virus. Is a virus alive? Well, it can replicate. Obviously, the virus specifically needs other cells to replicate. But we're looking into whether there's some way for genetic information to replicate outside a cell or within a protocell, or that's the whole point of this research, is to not just assume that, well, it has to start with a cell and that's it.
Tony, everything you want to weigh in? First play.
Yeah, well, first of all, protocells are not alive. Sal was commenting on that, how they're basically just coffins to life. They don't have permeable membranes. Proteins don't pass through them. Also, Tor mentioned how these chemical procedures in the lab, there's purification processes at every step. I'm not a PhD biochemist, but that's also another major problem. They also talk about some of the purified reagents. I think Cronin is going to bring that up soon.
Tony, do you know what a vesicle is?
The cell membrane?
No.
For the protocell, that's actually what they were using?
No.
Yeah, they're empty vesicles. And they actually make membranes out of all different kinds of material.
Yeah, but do you know that inside of a cell there are vesicles? Do you know how that works?
What exactly? Yeah, what? Proteins and enzymes and things that have to be permeable and move through a membrane?
Yeah, so you know that vesicles can join each other and make larger things? Larger membranes?
Like what? And where have we shown that in any prebiotic environment?
That's
just
how
play the video, Maddox. Yeah. Okay.
But so you said that it's not permeable. So a
protocells
could
are
join
coffins
with another protocell that has nutrients in it.
Protocells are not alive.
It doesn't need
No. Chemists have to insert information into these dead membranes, and they still don't come alive.
But
protocells are not living.
Your critique was that it has the membrane is not permeable.
All right, we want to get an opinion we want to get an opinion from an expert. We got, I don't know, size in the we got Sal.
Yeah, there's very complex ways that it happens.
Well, and there's also permeable vesicles too. I mean, this is part of what's done, and when it joins with the Gogli apparatus as well. I mean, they're permeable in that context.
And I think protocells are permeable to ribose. Just so happens to be the sugar that creates DNA. And it happens to be the sugar that's most permeable to cells.
Protocells are not alive, Snake. Nowhere close.
Yeah. If they were, we would have proven abiogenesis already.
Okay, let's
trying to figure out what is needed.
Yeah, exactly.
We're trying to figure out what is needed. So that's
we're inserting what we want. We're inserting what we want into these membranes.
The fact that we don't know yet is not a critique.
Right. In the future, we're going to find it. I know, man.
No, that's not what I said at all. So you could stop strawmanning.
Okay, let's continue.
But to address Sal's point, you can literally watch it happen. Vesicles confused without snare proteins. But that's how most cells do, like very finely tuned, very small vesicle fusions within the cell or without.
I don't even know if life really exists, right? But that's a really metaphysical discussion we can have another day. What I think is really important is to say, look, if I looked at the asteroid belt, right, and just zoomed in, and I didn't know anything about the laws of gravity, and I was let's just say I was someone who liked asteroids, I'd say, oh man, that's really complicated. And then a physicist says, oh no, actually, I'm just going to write down the equation of gravity, right? It's an inverse square law, 1/r², sum of the masses between them. Boom. The asteroid belt is a really bad place to discover gravity. But if you then go and look at a big gravity well, and there's an asteroid falling into it, suddenly that simpler explanation can then be applied in a more complex context. So I want to just quickly speak to one apparent contradiction. Life is boring, life is boring and life is complicated. What I'm saying is, I think it's boring to try and imagine what the chemistry could be at the origin of life, by just taking cells apart because we've got an existence proof problem. I'd rather zoom out and say, let's just put what we had available, guess, in a can and see what complex comes out and say, does that fall our Turing test for life? And then when it does, we then go, okay, we now care, and we're going to go and do that detailed mechanism. And we're going to be an organic chemist. We're going to do what all those amazing prebiotic chemists do, but we'll do them in the context of having made an observation that we find interesting rather than doing a historical narrative-based experiment. So the good news for all the prebiotic chemists, and they're fantastic chemists, is that there is work for them to do. The bad news is they might have to change their narrative, but that's great because we get closer to the problem. And I'm saying, I think I'm discovering gravity, what the equivalent of the force that produces life, and what is the natural phenomenon that does it. I haven't done it yet. I've got indications it might work. Your listeners must not take my words as proof we've made life. Most certainly not. And I didn't say that in the last episode. And had you listened to the last, Jim recounted the last episode word for word, I would explain very honestly that I am as confused as the next person. That's why I'm doing the experiment. If I already knew the answer, why would I do it? There's some people out there who are engineers doing chemistry, and they want to make stuff and make machines and do all that. And there are other people that are going from the bottom up and saying, what is it about physical reality that gives me complexity? And that's what we're homing in on. And it's a very important problem that hasn't been addressed correctly. And I'm pretty sure we're going to be really astonished at the outcomes from what I'm seeing in my lab. But great claims need absolutely fantastic evidence, completely transparent to argument. And that's one of the reasons why I came on and we're happy to debate with Jim, because I think this is incredibly productive to basically lay bare our assumptions and prod them and poke them and say why. And I think the prebiotic chemists are doing that now, to their credit. And I think that Jim hopefully will become more and more satisfied by that.
But Jim's earlier critique of you, Lee, that the autocatalytic kind of things that you've been able to create in the lab are at some level the very early foothills, if you like, of what it will take for more complex systems to develop and ultimately to become these, have all those facets of biological life that Jim outlined earlier. I think what I got from him was that is a huge extrapolation right there.
No, I can explain why in 1 second. Okay. And I think this is the thing. What we've got in our system is this. If you can imagine a system where you have a monkey on a typewriter and you say you've got a universe full of monkeys, one day they're going to make Shakespeare, you have to have a universe full of monkeys. What we've done in this system is we've shown, okay, we use pure sodium molybdate. Actually, on Earth, there is a spring in Idaho that has these molybdates, which naturally form. So we could go and find them, right, in the natural environment. These molybdates, when you add acid to them, they form a catalyst template that has information associated with it, which reads out a bigger structure that's impossible to form on its own. What does that mean? It's the template gives the monkey the information to write Shakespeare, and we get some Shakespeare out. Now, here's what I'm going to drive at. It's really important for Jim, and I hope to convince him. This Shakespeare that we've written means nothing because Shakespeare doesn't exist. So what we've got is a small template that's randomly forming that then has that is able to template a molecule that's massive, that can't form randomly, that there is a molecular information. But now this molecule forms, this molecule can then act on itself, and that information then becomes information. So what I'm trying to say is that the act of creating information is what we're trying to capture here, and we're showing a naturalistic process. And that's why I guess Jim is uneasy, quite rightly. Like, I'm shuffling a card deck and getting a royal flush and using that royal flush to make another royal flush. And I'm excited because it's the first time outside of biology that coupled catalytic sets have been shown to emerge. People have made them.
I don't know if Dr. Tour and Dr. Gard are still in the chat. If they are, I'm assuming, I guess the question I would have, and what Cronin just talked about, I'm assuming what he's relying on there is why you brought up the significance of the retraction of the RNA replication paper, is that if that is removed from the equation, then this whole formation of the information that's relying on no longer is actually a plausible premise. Sidebar, Dr. Gard just said, reading Cronin's actual papers was very frustrating for me as a biochemist. That's good. But sorry, guys, can go ahead and weigh in if you'd like.
Yeah, would Cy agree that Cronin's ideas are just far-fetched and not working?
Snake, do you have anything you want to say?
Well, I think it's a good point that he's showing how information can arise naturally.
Okay, so in the whole premise of the replication, all of that, even the stuff they've been able to pull off, which they're now having to concede is not actually remotely plausible from a natural perspective, they're ending up with shorter and shorter RNA strands. So they actually have less information, not more. So how do you address that?
In what?
Just give it more time under a rock on another planet.
Okay, so if you start, okay, you've got a strand, just for easy math purposes. Let's just say it's 50 nucleotide pairs, right? 50 base pairs. Let's just go with that, right? Easy math. Over time, it does not grow to be 100. It shrinks. So you're not gaining information, even if not even specified information, not even specific sequence information that might result in a polypeptide. We're talking about just it physically shrinks. Like, this is recognized as a massive issue. So, I mean, how do you address that?
Over replication?
Yeah.
So is this like what Sai was talking about, where it's a very imprecise replication?
No. We're not talking about fidelity right now. We're talking about just pure reduction over, like, in their experiments. There was a very fascinating interview probably about 2 months ago over on Stated Casually, I believe. I forget the researcher's name, but he just left the chemical evolution research facility in Atlanta, and he was talking about how this was a massive problem of it always gets shorter, never
After
expands.
what, though?
When they're able to catalyze replication, self-replication.
In what experiments?
Their experiments in
So
Origin
it's
of
not
Life
replicating
chemistry.
right, is what you're saying.
No, it is. It just shrinks.
Then it would not, if it was doing it accurately, then it would stay the same size.
No. It's not being replicated in the context of what happens in life and maintain the fidelity. You don't have any of those things. All those things are out of the equation. You're just dealing with an RNA strand. That's it. And it can copy itself. But then over time, it literally, because it has no way to maintain the fidelity, it ultimately is going to shrink.
So the original template is degrading.
Correct.
Is what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay, so
even though you're able to
what
get,
about
why? Because you're not being able to maintain fidelity. And this is what the whole point of needing all the transcription factors. That's why it has such relevance in the macro view of this whole equation. So the point I'm making is, if in their real world experiments, what they are observing, not what's hypothetical, what's being observed, is you actually lose whatever information you might have, even if it's not actually specified. We're talking about, hey, this isn't a sequence that means anything. Let's just have one that has enough pairs to be able to do this. It shrinks.
On the original? So and it keeps...
Okay, never mind. Let's continue.
This keeps replicating, right?
Yeah, there's no... Maddox did Cyberpunk.
The amount of sequence information required requires you to create it. Whereas in our salt system, yes, I have to get some sodium molybdate, which is one compound,
you're just gonna
and I have to add some lemon
right?
juice to it or some acid. But then the rest goes.
I think that's why you're obviously very excited that for you this is a breakthrough, and that obviously there's a lot of work to be done in where that goes ultimately. But the principle you seem to be saying is what's there. I'm going to go to another break. Sorry to cut in on what is a really fascinating discussion. I'm fascinated to hear what Jim will say.
Yeah, Maddox, did we get a response from
Origins of Life, round 2 with Lee Cronin and my guest James Tor on today's edition of Unbelievable.
If you listen to Unbelievable with Justin Briley on Premier Christian Radio and enjoy the conversations between Christians and skeptics, then this is the perfect app for you. For the latest...
Did we get a response on that
section there?
I don't know if we got one from Dr. Gart. Let's see. Looks like Sal's responded though. Let's see.
Sal asked me something about mitosis. But since you cut me off, if the template degrades, you still have what's copied, right?
No, because even if that is also, ultimately it's going to suffer the same fate.
Yeah, I got one more
question. It can also copy other things, right?
No, it can only... Okay, they all end up having the exact same end outcome. And they're also competing for all of the resources. That was another massive portion of the problem. Is ultimately whichever one is doing it the fastest, even if it's wrong, is the one that wins. And eventually you run out of the resources, which is a major problem. But all that aside, you still end up with a degradation from the starting point, not an increase. And the only way for you to possibly, like the whole premise of that has to be somehow allowed for in abiogenesis research is, hey, if we can just get to this point, then if the self-replication starts, then it'll expand. And what they're discovering is, okay, cool, we found a hypothetical, even though we can't get past the annealing problem to get to this stage, hey, we'll just create one where it can happen. But even if we do that, we still end up with a reduction, not an improvement. Like in the experimentation.
What experiment are you talking about? Because I've got a paper titled Self-Sustained Replication of an RNA Enzyme.
Okay, so when was that published?
What's the name of it?
I literally, it's your paper, bro. I just asked you, when is the paper? What's the paper you're referring to?
Oh, when was that published? 2009?
Okay. And who is the author?
Tracy Lincoln and Gerald Joyce.
Okay. The point I'm making is that 2020, whatever I don't know what they're saying in that paper. You have to send it to me and I'll read it, but I'm pretty sure, I doubt that PhDs in 2020 would be saying that actually isn't happening. I mean, this was a couple months ago.
It depends on what mechanism you're using. These aren't all the same mechanisms. But you're saying that based on this one condition where RNA templates degraded, therefore there are no conditions in which they can be self-sustaining.
Let's see, where Dr. Gart says, let's see, what is he responding to? Where's James?
Yes.
Okay. Chemical evolution favored the replication of shorter RNA strands, so they began to predominate. Ultimately, hydrolysis kept shortening RNA before they can self-polymerize into functional lengths. And then Dr. Gart says, right, that's exactly what Jim keeps trying to tell people. The natural processes do not favor complexity growth.
Exactly.
Which is exactly what I'm saying.
Sai, is Lee Cronin's work highly manipulated and still not leading towards life? If you could answer whether yes or no.
Hang on, Tony. Dr. Gart says, important. Joyce, which is the paper you're referring to, does not mean template-directed replication. He is really talking about ligation.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Sai that. Sai, if Lee Cronin's chemistry is highly manipulated and far-fetched and still not leading towards life, can you give us a yes or no in the comments?
Okay, so Snake, you just had two PhD biochemists say that you're misinterpreting that whole piece. So what's your response?
These are ribozymes. I'm not sure what he's saying I'm misinterpreting, though.
Okay. All right, let's continue.
Because they're self-replicating.
Jim and Lee essentially saying, look, it seems to me that
so we're not going to talk about what the problem is
that have been established are at least the beginnings of the principles you need for life, in the sense of something that can exist in a complex system through time. You're at the very beginnings of seeing something like that, and from everything that Lee has said, he sees that it's going to be something like the law of gravity. It's going to be the kind of biological equivalent of a law simply enacting itself in the universe. You don't have to invoke anything special or magical. It will just happen given the circumstances. So yeah.
We got a yes on that. Pause that for a second. Thank you, Sai.
Agreeing with Lee that those.
What do you want to say, Tony?
Yeah, so Sai, you're agreeing and saying yes that Lee Cronin's work and many other origin of life researchers' work is highly manipulated and still not leading towards life. Is that a yes or a no?
Yeah, do you understand what experimental controls are?
I'm not talking to you.
I know, yeah, you're not talking to the person you're here to debate. You're an intellectual coward.
I'm talking to Sai, a PhD biochemist.
Yeah, I'm talking to you.
You're irrelevant right now.
In the debate that you offered me, you're an intellectual coward.
I'm talking to a PhD biochemist. You have nothing to offer.
All right. Snake, do you have something you want to say?
No, he's an intellectual coward.
Okay, let's continue.
That's it.
Yeah, you're a total fool that has nothing.
are amazing synthetic
Except
chemists.
for
They
hundreds
tie
and
one hand
thousands of
behind their back
experiments.
because they restrict themselves to aqueous systems. They restrict themselves to very simple, basic chemicals. They're great chemists, and they make amazingly complex things using all of their intellect and then suggesting that this could be how life formed, which is a big extrapolation from the one little molecule that they've made. But they're great chemists. I have no problem with that. And I see that Lee is trying to get a fundamental piece of life, and that is being able to construct, to have information come from these little molybdate reactions, and that's great. I'm happy for him, and that's a wonderful thing. I still think the extrapolation is just huge, and the target is hard. Look, I don't work in the area of origin of life. This is a hard target, and what happens is, since Miller-Urey, and I've written about this, that was 67, 68 years ago since they came up with the Miller-Urey experiment. Many people thought we were very close. The problem is the target gets further away. As we understand what life is, what life as a biological life, where we live, where most origin of life people are trying to direct toward, the target moves further and further away. So we're not getting closer with time. We're getting further away with time,
Yeah,
because every
totally
year
agree.
there's more
You
found
can
out
stop
about a
it there.
cell and how a cell communicates, how information is transferred within a cell. And you're like, whoa, this is utterly amazing. And what Lee has done is he's trying to get at the very basics of how could you get information to build up from this random system that is, he's trying to approximate randomness with a pseudo-random system in his lab and build up information. That's wonderful. Lee, I'm not contesting with you on that. I have no contest with that. But to suggest that that is a form that is going to give us some understanding of how life as we know it in a biological system, this is a very, very long way away. I don't know what that Evolution 2.0 prize demands. I don't know what its requirements are. I've tried to look it up. It seems kind of nebulous to me. But it's just so far from life. And I'm glad that Lee is here today. And he's saying that, look, we haven't made life. He thinks he's going to be able to make what have telltale signs of the beginnings of life, but I'm glad that he's admitting, maybe he's not, and he'd like to correct me on this, that he's very far from what we look at as a biological definition of life that has to have a cell, whether that be a eukaryotic cell or a bacterium. Bacterium is still a highly complex structure, that we're very, very far away from that, and to project like we understand this or like we're somehow close to this is just a wrong projection.
I would directly answer that. I think so. I think thanks, Jim, for those comments. I think there's a lot we agree on.
So did Sai give me a yes or a no?
I'm not sure. He may have.
I just can't check comments right now.
I think he said yes.
Oh, okay. Oh, maybe Snake should debate Sai.
I don't know if he responded. The last thing I said was yes.
Okay, he did say yes. That was a yes.
Yes about what?
The chemistry being highly manipulated and still not leading towards life.
Oh yes.
Okay.
I think the interesting portion of this, the question for both of y'all is whether you agree or disagree, is Tour was making the point that we're not getting closer, we're getting further away. The goalposts, it's getting more and more difficult. There's more to account for, and we're having fewer and fewer answers from the macro point of view. And it's like, hey, you saw, it's like the equivalent of, oh, cool, we ran a dive play up the middle, gained 2 yards, and then 10-yard penalty.
Yeah, and the target just gets pushed back further and further. Is that what he said? The target is being pushed back?
Yes. And by the way, Dr. Gard says yes on that.
Oh,
and
great.
then,
Excellent.
Dr. Carter says RNA is so liable that even when coated with lipids, the mRNA SARS-CoV-2 vaccines degrade in 1 to 4 weeks at fridge temperatures and have to be stored at below 70 Celsius. I guess we're talking about in the context of half-life and such.
Right. Things breaking down. Yeah, you had mentioned that too, Maddox, right? Throwing things in
so
freezers, heating things.
So,
go ahead.
So Snake, in the context of the big picture getting further and further away, what's your response to that?
Well, I think that's making progress. If you're making progress on defining what your actual goal is, what things you need to meet, what the qualities you have to meet, what you have to do to make the experiments work, that's learning, even if you're learning that you don't know something, because you're understanding what you don't know and you're understanding what you need to know, essentially. So if you're thinking, oh, all we have to do is just throw these things together and it'll create a cell, well, the more you learn about what doesn't work, the more you learn about what would work. So Yeah, we're learning more about what actually needs to go into these experiments. That's fine. I know you will say, well, it's never going to happen. We'll never catch up. But that's predicting the future. I'm not saying we will. I'm saying we should keep trying. And I'm also saying that God did it is also a cop-out and not an explanation of anything.
Tony, you got anything you want to say?
Just the level of delusion. I mean, we have two PhD biochemists in the chat. I don't know if that Snake wants to have a discussion with them. One just admitted that the chemistry is not leading towards life. It's not making progress, and it's also highly manipulated. I think I got a yes from Sai. I don't know what else can be said here. This is just,
But you
delusion.
can't conclude from that therefore it's impossible to meet that goal.
And so we'll conclude that it will be proven in the future. Okay.
No, that I literally already said that I don't do that.
So I don't know what we're debating here. Do you want to debate a
You
biochemist?
need to work on your listening skills.
No. So do you want to debate a biochemist on this stuff? I'm not claiming to be an expert.
If there's a proposition, I'll talk to them.
Yeah, you don't have anything though. Okay.
I have Sai's email.
But he just agreed with me, by the way. Is that accurate, Maddox?
I think so, yes.
Yeah, I think we all agree that they're highly controlled experiments. Do you know
it's
why?
Not helping your
Do you know
camp.
why they're highly controlled?
Snake, it's
Do you know
not
what
relating.
An experimental control
Yes, but
is?
it's not relating to prebiotic chemistry. It's a problem for your camp.
It is. There are prebiotic.
Okay, so you just admitted that. This is wow.
There are prebiotically plausible experiments, and the fact that we're studying something under controlled conditions doesn't mean that it can't happen naturally. It just means that we're removing variables that would make the experiment inefficient or inconclusive.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you don't understand what an experimental control
You don't understand any of this. Of course we understand how experiments work. We're not objecting to how the experiment is being set up.
You are, though.
Or what's being... No, we're not.
Yeah, you're saying it's too highly controlled to be relevant.
Sai, are these experiments highly manipulated, or are they relating to prebiotic conditions? And are they successful under prebiotic environments? Give us a yes or no, please.
There's a huge range. Some of them are more plausible than others. Some of them have proven not to be plausible. Some of them have proven to be plausible.
So Dr. Carter makes a very good point. In the dichotomy of naturalism versus intelligence, if the known chemical/physical laws demonstrate abiogenesis is impossible, then one is compelled to accept the alternative.
Yeah, that's the problem with proving a negative. That bar of proof is so high that's almost impossible to meet. You can prove individual sets of conditions do not lead to some hypothesis. That doesn't prove that.
Yeah, we know,
it's
Snake.
impossible
There's always some
to get
environment.
there.
I know. Yeah, there's always going to be an environment. I know.
That's not what I'm saying.
You don't know what
I'm
you're
not
saying.
saying that there is some undiscovered way to do it out there for 100% sure. I'm saying that you cannot conclude just because some of them have failed that it's impossible. Otherwise, we should have concluded based on Leonardo da Vinci's flying machines that flying is impossible. Because he made machine after machine after machine that failed. And hundreds of years later, they figured it out.
I think
so. You cannot conclude because an experiment fails.
I'm pretty sure that Da Vinci created schematics that if he had combustion engine would have been viable from an aerodynamic perspective.
And
so
he didn't have a combustion engine, did he?
Right. But in
that
the
was made hundreds of years later.
I understand that. But in the context of what we're talking about, so outside of abiogenesis, are there things that, based on the known laws of physics and chemistry, are there things that chemists will just not pursue because it's not plausible?
Right. It's a total dead end. I think Sai responded. My comments are going up.
The individual experiments will show that certain things are implausible. Yeah. If you put dirt and water together, that is not going to produce a cell.
Maddox,
Period.
can we check the comments?
You can prove
Dr.
that you
Garnett,
can't do
he
that
had
experiment.
he had to leave.
No, he left the comment.
Okay, yeah, he did.
Yeah, there it is.
That's Jim. Okay, he's talking about Dr. Tour. So that is Jim's main point. Almost all these experiments are highly manipulated and can't reflect what happened on primitive Earth. Good night.
Yeah, exactly. I rest my case on that as well. I gotta run to bed. I'm waking up kids here, so have a happy New Year, Maddox.
All right, appreciate you, Tony. You have a great night.
Yeah, man, it's been 2 hours now. Yeah, we can bring back side guard. Let's have a 2-on-2 with him or discussion, or James Carter. Yeah, we can have side guard out. Have a good night, brother.
Appreciate you. Sal says Da Vinci had working models of flying machines. They are called birds.
Well, so
can
I address something Sal said about mitosis?
Yeah, 1 second. Okay, good folks. So, in chat, I will either continue this on for a little bit, and we may have some open room. If other people want to come in and have a conversation, we can do that. Otherwise, we'll wrap it up pretty soon. So, if you want to come on in to have discussion, let me know in chat. If so, I'll post the link. Otherwise, we'll give it a few more minutes and then wrap things up. Okay, go ahead, Snake.
Yeah, so I think he asked me, how does mitosis happen without snares? Something like that. I think this is, again, kind of missing the point that mitosis would not be the way that cells replicated in early life, and almost definitely wouldn't be how genetic information would replicate without a cell. It's a highly derived cell process. So that's not what we're studying in Origin of Life. And the other thing about... hey, Sal.
Sal, you're on mute.
And the other thing, snares are... They're basically used to mediate vesicle fusion. That doesn't mean that vesicle fusions can't happen without snares. It's used to identify very specific vesicles and bring them together in a controlled manner. And this doesn't mean that membranes with different mixtures of chemicals in them cannot fuse at larger scales. And then I had a few more things for Tony, but he's gone.
Danny's joined us. Sal was just here, and he had to. I'm not sure he must have dropped out. He'll probably be back in a minute. You guys can discuss that that piece. Okay, so it looks like Sal's coming back in. Okay, Sal, do you want to welcome to the stream? Do you want to address what Snake was just talking about there on?
Yeah, I think Snake misunderstood my point. Snares and mitosis are different things, and I'm not accusing him of misrepresenting me. I'm saying I probably wasn't clear enough. But the point is we're going to appeal to just vesicles randomly, with random chemicals in them randomly fusing. That doesn't solve the problem of mitosis. This is a dead end, just appealing to vesicles. And the point where all this came about is, what are you going to do without proteins mediating the process of mitosis or transmembrane proteins? This is a serious problem. So just because vesicles can maybe randomly merge, which is probably not always a good thing. I mean, it's a good thing that cells don't randomly merge with each other. So the problem of not having transmembrane proteins is serious, or proteins that will mediate mitosis. So snares was a separate topic, and I apologize for the confusion. Snake, I really want to commend you. Oh my goodness, you're just like outnumbered 20, 30 to 1, and I've been there on the other side. So no hate here. You actually, you strike me as that bold samurai who was charging an array of Gatling guns. I mean, there's some determination on your part, and I salute you for that. So no hate here, and Merry Christmas. If Hope you're not offended if I say Merry Christmas to you.
Not at all. We celebrate Christmas, and yeah, I'll take it. Thank you. If you can't take the firing squad, then I don't think you know your stuff well enough. But yeah.
We got
what-
Daniel and Danny have joined the stream. What's going on, guys? Welcome.
There's
Welcome.
an imposter. Where's the
Hey, guys.
imposter?
Imposter? Yeah, you. Just kidding. Happy Merry Christmas, everyone.
If I could add one more thing too, is the reason that I brought up vesicle fusions is just when people say that there's no way to get anything through the membranes, that is one way to do it. So. Yeah.
Good point. I think it's moot, but thank you for pointing that out. I will put that. I'm trying to make materials for graduate students, and so it's good to hear other people critique, and you're certainly invited to critique some of the materials we make, just so that it's better that we try to cover all ends. So thanks, Snake.